I'm Ross Camden, and on August 23, 2007, I lost my job. At the time, I thought it was one of the worst things that could happen to me, just behind the tragic accidental deaths of my mom and dad several years earlier. In the short term, though, that job loss became the least of my concerns. But looking back, it might have been the second luckiest thing to happen to me. It was the least of my concerns because of what was going on between me and my wife, Kimberly. We were coming up on our 6th anniversary, and things were far from good. I couldn't pinpoint why, but our daily routine had turned into something mindlessly repetitive. A week or so before I got let go, I tried to get a sense of what was going wrong. We were cleaning up the kitchen after another meal, marked by the usual silence between us. I'm not the most perceptive guy, but even I could tell how tense she was, almost like she had to brace herself just to be in the same room with me. And now that I recognized it, I realized she'd been that way for months. That chilled me. Why? What had gone wrong? At last, I said, "Kimberly, can I ask you something?" She put the last dish into the dishwasher and turned with a questioning look. "Honey, what is it? What have I done? It's obvious that I must have done something that's pissed you off. There's been something very wrong between us for months, and I have no clue what brought it on." For a long second, she looked at me with a strange expression. I had the fleeting feeling that she was biting back something she wanted to say. But the feeling and the moment passed, and her expression went neutral. She shrugged and said, "Ross, get a grip. There's nothing wrong between us or with our marriage. Get realistic. All marriages get a little bland and routine after a while. It can't stay all honeymoonish forever." Well, I knew that. But it didn't have to be that way, I thought, and I told her that. I wanted to make an effort to rev it up, to bring back a little bit of that old excitement. But she waved her hand dismissively and said she was fine with the way things were. As we continued to get the house locked up and ready for the night, I thought I could see her darting glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. When we were going to bed later, she delayed climbing in for a few seconds. She stood there in her sheer sexy nightgown, looking at me, seemingly pensive. But then she laid herself down and pushed against me. We made love with an intensity that had been missing for months. I was made content. For a while. That was typical Kimberly, a person of contradictions. Kimberly was, by nature and unhappy experience, a reserved and aloof woman. She was markedly like that when I first met her, both of us burned by previous marriages to unfaithful spouses. We met at work, Unified Global Holdings, UniG for short. I managed the engineering publications support group. Well, I used to manage it. And I do again, sort of. Only not so much manage as well. I'll explain that later. UniG is a cobbled-together clump of a number of companies, the result of a binge of acquisitions and takeovers during the 90s. Because of that history, we, that is UniG, make a lot of widgets and provide varied services. For almost every widget of any complexity, there are operators manuals and parts lists, and service manuals, and installation guides, and so on. For most services, there are users manuals and reference guides, and tons of brochures. It had been my job to keep all that engineering publications up to date and in stock, and to get the publications out to service reps and clients who asked for them. It was engineering publications, called EPUB for short. Everything had to be reduced to a short name or acronym. Some kind of law, I guess. UniG set a high premium on customer support, and EPUB was considered to be very important for customer satisfaction. And I thought my little two-person group did a damned fine job. When I first went to work in the EPUB support group, Kimberly had been my secretary. Well, secretary was a misnomer. She had really been my all-around assistant. Someone up in the higher echelons was uncomfortable with the notion of a manager with one person to manage. But there were managers with secretaries who had no one else reporting to them. Odd, but true. I do my own letters and such, and answer my phone, so the secretarial title was a dodge. Kimberly was there to help me do my job. I ran the big picture. She followed through with the details. It took 2 people to do the job, and both people had a full day's worth of to-dos every day. We were both pretty lonely when we started working together. I was like a drunk who had taken the pledge, only in my case it was against women. I had vowed never again, after my crippling, near-neutering marriage to Laura Davis. Never again would I let a woman get me by the gonads. From bitter experience, I knew that when she rips them out, the heart comes out too. It's funny. You wouldn't think that such small things would have tendrils that go way up into your chest. But they must, because I could feel the hollowness after the cardiectomy. I swear I could hear the wind blow through it on cold, lonely, wintry nights. Yes, I was a hollow, angry, weary man. Recreational sex was the only level of relationship I was interested in, and my occasional partners were like-minded, or they were gone. At least that's what I said, and what I thought I believed. So how did we wind up married? Well, someone once wrote about how the heart has its reasons that the mind doesn't understand. And most men and women are simply not meant to be alone. At least that's my reluctant conclusion. See, despite my steely resolve, I found that I couldn't keep from reluctantly thinking about Kimberly when I was away from her, and covertly eyeing her when we worked together. She was very attractive, but as I said before, aloof and wary. Her attitude was like mine, only more so. She dressed down for a severe look that hid her figure. She wore no makeup and hid her pretty face behind big glasses. Her story, which came out slowly, was that once upon a time she had met, fallen for, and married a hunk. Unfortunately, the hunk turned out to be a cheater, and 4 years into their marriage, she caught him in the sack, hunking with one of her friends. At the end of that story, she had sworn off men. Sound familiar? I was gun-shy too for similar reasons. When I first got into the job market after a stint in the Navy and then college, I took an offer from a firm in a small town. While there I met, and then married, and then was betrayed by, and then fled from a woman who could be on the recruiting poster for unfaithful wives. I wound up here in Endicott City. I found work as a tech writer-editor. 7 years ago, the firm I was with lost their contract and I lost my job. I went down to the state employment office to apply for unemployment. I never collected a penny of it, because their referral service sent me to interview for an opening at UniG, and I jumped at it. I was in the writing editing section of the publications department, merrily writing and revising EPUB when the current EPUB manager got careless and greedy and got caught scamming the company on his expense forms. UniG took a dim view of that. They fired him and asked me to come down to the front office for a little talk with a guy named Harley something or other. Harley ran the pubs department, which included both writing editing and EPUB. He was heavy-set, balding, and not that impressive looking, but he was sharp. 2 minutes of conversation showed me that. In the Navy, we would say that he had all his shit in one sock. We chatted for a few minutes, nothing very specific, but it seemed like he was feeling me out. It was nothing at all like a formal interview, much less a job interview. And yet the upshot was that he promoted me to EPUB manager, and I inherited Kimberly as my assistant. Harley moved up a few years later, and they brought in a new guy to replace him. I was decidedly uninterested in UniG politics and paid no attention to who was where in the hierarchy. A few years later they promoted that guy, whose name I don't even remember. He had his secretary pass on any edicts. Her name was Amanda, if I remember rightly. It could have been Brunhild. She would have made a hell of a Valkyrie. About 2 years ago, they promoted the guy who'd replaced no-name guy and decided to reorganize the support functions, and that was how I wound up working for Jared Vaughn. The reorganization kept him away from the big functions, and even I suspected that was no accident. He had EPUB and a few other piddling little groups. It was a fairly small domain for a manager, and I swear that it looked like the idea was to minimize the potential damage that he could do. Seemed like a strange way to run a business. Why have him as a manager at all if he was apparently so incompetent? He spent most of his time kissing his bosses, and buttering up some of the other executives. I had no idea why they let him hang around with that level of management. I appreciated that they did, because that meant I had to spend less time with him, explaining over and over why his ideas for EPUB were stupid. In a nice way, of course. Obviously, Kimberly and I spent a lot of time together on the job, and after a long period of standoffishness, she slowly began to open up. At first it was verbal. We went from "Good morning, Miss Brown," "Good morning, Mr. Camden," to "Hi, Kimberly," "Hello, Ross." Then we began to get more comfortable around each other, and I began to get to know her a little. And despite her marital disaster and her forswearing mankind, I came to suspect that behind that cold facade, she was lonely and a little bit frightened. As I said before, most men and women are not meant to be alone. Unfortunately, her immediate reaction to any interest from a man was to stiffen up and shut down. Despite her good looks, there weren't many guys who could sustain an interest in her, given her coldness and lack of response. Despite my own demons, I could not resist becoming interested in her. But unlike the sex hounds, I was interested in her for more than her body. We talked on the job between busy times. We ate our sandwiches and swapped our sad stories. We talked about honesty. We talked about fidelity and how neither of us had broken our vows or ever would. We had been on the other side and knew all too well the pain that infidelity created. I liked a loose work environment, and so we started joking around, first me and then her giving it right back. It was innocuous and occasionally juvenile, but it loosened both of us up. Finally, I asked her out on a real date. She got up and practically ran to the ladies' restroom. When she finally came out, she said she was scared. She said that she was being honest, that she liked me, but that she was afraid of making another mistake. I said that was the same for me, too, but that I still wanted to see her. Kimberly looked down at her shoes and shyly said, "I'd like that too, Ross." Now, unlike her ex, I was not exactly what you'd call a hunk. I'm about 5'9". I seem a bit shorter because of the stocky build I inherited from my dad. Strong legs, broad butt, wide shoulders, and a barrel chest. That's me. So I look shorter. Okay, so I lied. I am shorter, maybe 5'8.5". I'm neither handsome nor ugly, just pretty ordinary in the looks department. I'm not a likely candidate to be anyone's Prince Charming, certainly not a looker like Kimberly. But see, she'd already done the hunky Prince Charming thing. Been there, done that, and had the broken heart to show for it. I had to assume that she was a bit more realistic about what's important and what's not. Or so it seemed to me at that time. We started to date on the cutie, partly because it was against company policy, and more because we didn't want anyone to know. We didn't need comments or pressure from anyone outside of the two of us. We had enough personal demons to deal with. We moved from casual to interested to involved. Finally, one day I confessed my feelings for her. I told her I wanted to take our relationship to the next level and make love with her. She said she felt the sexual attraction as well, but she was afraid of making another mistake. We danced around it for several weeks and ultimately decided to get together. We were tentative in our lovemaking at first, but we both found pleasure and fulfillment in it. We gradually lowered the rest of our barriers. I had a strong growing feeling for her, and eventually I told her I loved her and asked her to marry me. Well, I was ahead of her on that. She pulled back and put me off. She said she had feelings for me, but still was afraid of getting into something that wouldn't last and getting hurt again. She said that if she ever got married again, she would be 100% faithful, and she wanted to be absolutely certain that her partner felt the same. I guess I did a pretty good job of convincing her, because eventually she said yes, she would be happy to marry me. I was like, oh, Fabius de Kalu, Calais. I thought I was the happiest formerly gun-shy man in the world. That was 6 years ago. Fast forward to recently. For a long time, we still had the physical side going pretty well. We were practiced and caring, and it went way beyond mere sex. We settled into maybe 3 or 4 times a week, with lots of foreplay. It was good, but, well, recently sometimes Kimberly wasn't always really there in some way. Oh, she liked the sex okay, no doubt about that, but it got to be that once we were done, she was done with me. Just a quick rollover and right to sawing wood. Very guy-like. Well, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I like the after-sex cuddling. I thought that was part of it. Kimberly did too, at first. When we were first married, we wound up wrapped around each other when we fell asleep. It was very important to both of us. Now, if I persisted, she sometimes got snappish and irritated. It crossed my mind that Laura had been like that too. Wild free sex and then just roll over to get away from me. Kimberly told me over and over that she was happy and comfortable in our relationship. Well, maybe so, and I was glad to hear it, but actions speak louder than words. It was getting so that sometimes I wondered if she even really liked me anymore. Forget about loving me. Did she really even like me, other than in bed? I wondered. She said she was comfortable and trusted me, but I worried about the rest of her feelings toward me. And then we had that little after-dinner conversation, the one in which she got the strange expression and almost said something, but stopped. And after which we went to bed and made better love than we had had in a long time. I kept getting the sense that we were living a semi-parallel pair of semi-detached lifestyles. It wasn't my idea. I kept seeking togetherness. But Kimberly seemed to want to keep some of Kimberly to herself. Some of that old aloofness had come back. But that had been a defense mechanism. What was she defending herself from now? Me? I began to wonder if there was some deficiency in me that I couldn't keep a woman happy. First Laura and now Kimberly? About 1 year before the conversation and the hot lovemaking and the next day canning, there was a time when Kimberly's lovemaking altered and became almost bipolar. Later, when Irene and I began to piece it all together, I realized that it began after she had gone back to work in the UniG travel office. Who's Irene? I'll tell you in a bit. And no, I didn't cheat with her. Well, not intentionally, and neither of us had any idea of cheating. Hell, she'd have smacked me silly for even thinking about making a pass. Whether she had feelings for me or not was beside the point. I was married. Back to the bipolar thing. When Kimberly and I actually made love, it didn't seem much different than before. We were used to each other's wants and needs. I always tried to meet hers, and that usually led to meeting most of mine. But we weren't doing it as often, and the drought seemed to come in batches. 1 week we might make love 3 or 4 times, and it would be full-bore lovemaking with all the trimmings. Then there would come a string of nights on weeks when she worked late. I could understand her being tired, But she had worked late many times before and had come home horny. Maybe she would just let me go down on her to where she climaxed. I didn't have to get off every time. You see, it was a way of showing my love for her. But now, she didn't even want that, where all she had to do was lie there. Come Monday night, and Kimberly would grimace and hold herself apart and say she was too tired. Then Tuesday, she'd say she had cramps, but it wasn't anywhere near her monthly. Then it might be a sudden Wednesday night headache. Then the next night something else. I don't know, the vapors, or the collawobbles, or the marthambles. She developed complaints that aren't even in the damn dictionary. Or she complained that all I thought about was sex, like I was a sex fiend. What the complaint was didn't really matter. These afflictions only came on at nighttime, and she would always have miraculously recovered by next morning. But they had the effect that we'd go the whole week without sex. Then Monday would come, and the complaints were gone. She'd be rubbing up against me and being apologetic for last week and said she'd make it up to me. And she would. Well, I had no clue, but I wanted to believe it was just some phase she was going through. How early does menopause come? Anyway, I was 37. She was 33. That sounded awfully young for menopause. It wasn't 1 week on and 1 week off either, nothing that regular. In fact, there seemed to be no real pattern. I tried to ignore it. Then came the date that will live in infamy, August 23rd. The date I was terminated from Uni-G. I realized in hindsight that it was my own fault. I had been incredibly stupid. I had told the truth. What a maroon. What was I thinking? What I did was say that my secretary, Irene Ellison, could do my job. I said it to the other managers in a joking manner because I was proud of her. I'd hired Irene to replace Kimberly, who had quit so we could come out in the open and get married. No dummy, Kimberly had insisted on checking Irene out before I hired her. Kimberly met Irene for lunch and had passed her as no threat. I could understand her thinking, looking at the two women objectively. Kimberly was very pretty, a total knockout, the whole fantasy package. Once she came out of her shell and started dressing to show herself off. Irene was short and plump, with an open, pleasant face. She was built pretty. If she had been 4 or 5 inches taller, you would have said she had a nice womanly hourglass figure. In the normal, everyday way of things, Irene had an intelligent, pleasant face. However, when she was happy, her smile transformed her. Smiling, she looked very appealing. That was my first impression when I'd interviewed her, that winsome smile. She was well qualified and had an energetic, upbeat personality. We weren't 20 minutes into the interview when I stopped saying things conditionally and spoke of what she was going to be doing. She realized that I was going to offer her the job, and she just beamed. When I first hired her, I signed off on her W-4 paperwork and thought she had made a mistake by listing 4 exemptions. But I checked the manager's manual and learned that you can do that if your tax situation is such that you didn't need all of the FICA taxes deducted, such as if you have heavy deductions for medical or whatever. The number of exemptions is a crude tool for setting how much withholding you really need so as to be square with Uncle Sam on April 15th. You could put down 20 exemptions as long as it works out on tax day. So I didn't say anything about it to her. When she reported aboard, she was all business, and I saw little of that winsome smile in those first days. My efforts to get her to loosen up made her look at me warily. I wasn't trying to get anything going. God, I would never have even thought of cheating on Kimberly. But I liked a certain loose collegial relationship at work, and initially Irene wasn't comfortable with certain aspects of that. She would just get quiet, stare at me with a kind of stubborn look and pull back. I swear it was innocent stuff, mostly verbal. I was familiar with those sexual harassment at work videos and went to those in-house seminars, and nothing I ever broached would raise a ripple of concern. But Irene had her own personal boundaries, and I learned to respect them quick, fast, and in a hurry, as the saying goes. I tried to respect her privacy about her personal life. I suspected that she had some personal aspects of her life that she preferred to keep to herself, as she never spoke much about home. So I tried to respect her boundaries. And after a time, I think she realized that and appreciated my restraint. We got along better. And as she got more comfortable with me, she lightened up a little bit. So, as I said, I had praised Irene and said she could do my job. And someone, probably someone who was not a fan of mine, had told my a-hole boss, Jared Vaughn, what I'd said about how Irene could run the whole show. I had meant it, but in a general sense. She really couldn't do both jobs by herself. Hell, neither could I. Not for the long haul. There was just too much to get done each day. Hers was the detailed nuts and bolts planning and follow-up. Mine was more the overall planning and oversight and customer schmoozing. Irene had little experience with much of that. Plus I had the con when desperation time problems popped up and needed desperation troubleshooting. That was beyond her at this point. I was one of Irene's biggest fans, and I knew that with experience she would become able to do those things. Hell, part of my job was to teach her to succeed me, or at least that's the way I saw it. But for a brief time, sure, Irene understood the essentials of both parts and could keep things going. Hell, after 6 years together, I would have been disappointed if she couldn't. She was even better at it than Kimberly had ever been. To be truthful, I didn't know much about Irene's personal life. As I said, she was guarded about it. I knew she was 30 and single and lived with her mother. From some little bits of information, I came to believe that her mother was in poor health. Irene had to take time off every few weeks to take her mother to medical appointments. Even with UniG's very good medical coverage, there were copays and non-covered medical expenses that could take a bite out of your income when there were chronic health problems. I figured that accounted for the extra withholding exemptions. Our working relationship was friendly, but she was adamant about doing anything outside of work. Hell, she wouldn't even let me take her out for an occasional lunch, not even to the place just up the road where lots of people from UniG go. No one even thinking about hanky-panky would do it in front of a gaggle of colleagues. And of course going out for a dinner was out of the question. She would let me pay for delivered lunches and dinners when we were working on a crash project. One other thing about Irene, she was everyone's friend. That woman knew at least 75% of the people in the office and down in the industrial area where we were situated. She had a network of girlfriends everywhere. That's what she did for lunch. Met with her gal pals. That also gave her a reason for ducking my luncheon invitations. Not that I was ever trying to play her, you understand? It was just that I was used to eating out with colleagues once in a while. Well, I see that I am straying off the track here. On August 23rd, I had no warning. Just as I was thinking about going out to grab a quick lunch by myself, my jerk boss Jared Vaughn called me into his office. I did think it was odd that he told me to bring along my laptop. He told me to close the door. "Ross, you've been a pretty good employee," he smarmed, "but we are being squeezed by rising costs, and frankly, your salary makes you a good target for contraction. There's no good way to say this. I'm laying you off with 2 weeks' pay in lieu of notice." Well, I was surprised, but I didn't waste my time to try to argue with him and bargain for my job. Jared is a horrible combination. A crappy manager and a rigid manager all rolled up around a hole. Most times it was damn near impossible to get a decision out of him. But on those rare occasions when he did make a decision, he camped down on it. I guess it was the novelty of actually having made one. He had the termination checkout list in front of him and relieved me of my keys, my ID badge, and my corporate American Express card. He told me I had 15 minutes to download any personal files off my UniG-issued laptop. He had a couple of blank CDs handy, which I later learned were deducted from my termination check. What a sweetheart. Then he watched me, supposedly to make sure I wasn't copying off corporate secrets or proprietary information. As if he would even know what any of that looked like. As I worked, he read from a cheat sheet about how I was bound by the employment agreement I'd signed when I first came to work back in 2001. It covered me while at UniG and after I was gone from UniG. Under the dead hand of the EA, I couldn't spill company secrets. Any creative properties that I developed while at UniG were the property of the company, blah, blah, blah. I'd heard scuttlebutt that most of that EA stuff was hard to enforce legally, so I didn't pay much attention. I was busy thinking how this was going to go over with Kimberly. At the end, I signed to show that I had been briefed. I also signed a sheaf of HR paperwork about carrying over some of my insurance benefits under the COBRA laws. Oh, and if you thought that this whole thing takes the cake, this just puts the cherry on top of the frosting of that cake. My time officially on the payroll that day ended just before he called me into his office. I got fired and processed out on my own time. Sweet. He called in 2 waiting security guards to escort me to my desk. It was something like the Rogues March from those old movies, when an officer was busted out of the army. I guess if I had epaulets, he'd have tried to rip them off. For a fleeting moment I wished that I did have epaulets. I'd have let him rip one off. Then I'd have ripped his damned face off and stuffed it up his butt. Well, I didn't have epaulets, and he didn't rip one off, and I didn't get to do all that good stuff. That was just my futile fantasy. See, I knew why he was rubbing it in. I'd not tried very hard to hide my opinion of Jared. He was a living example of a political appointee. He had no idea of what my job entailed, but both of us knew I could probably do his, and do it better. I was pissed at the whole escort thing. It was done that way to embarrass me. When me and my entourage marched up to my office, Irene was putting the last of the personal items from my desk into copy paper boxes. She was crying. "Oh God, Ross, I'm so sorry," she cried. "I can't believe this. Mr. Vaughn told me to pack your personal items from your desk, and that you were being terminated." The larger of the 2 security guards brusquely ordered her to be quiet. There was to be no talking with the terminated associate, he said. Well, that snapped me out of my passivity. I turned toward him and away from security guard number 2, who happened to be a guy I went to school with, name of Ali. I pushed my face into number 1's. He was taller and bigger than me, but I didn't give a crap at that point. He wasn't expecting any pushback and leaned back a tad. I said, "Listen, pal, you do not talk to Irene like that, understand? Now, I'm not a big guy, the way these two were, but I'm fairly strong and in good shape, and I learned a few things in the Navy about handling myself in a fight. Ali was a big guy, but he was not a hard big guy. If it came to it, I was pretty sure I could hold my own with him. But it wouldn't come to that, because I had done him and his missus a few favors over the years. Hell, I had been his reference when he applied for this security job. He'd gotten careless at his old job and got caught goofing off. I talked to him and judged that he had learned his lesson, so I'd endorsed his application. After that, when her firm cut back, I'd endorsed his wife Sophie for a job in human resources. With that on my side, I knew he was not going to give me any problem as long as I kept this within bounds. I noted that number 1 wore a wedding ring, and his name tag said O'Bannon. I said, "Look, O'Bannon, you aren't impressing anyone trying to be a hard nose. Ali knows me, and he'll tell you I'm a square shooter. Suppose your wife was having a miserable time at work and was crying, and then someone barked at her like you just talked to Irene. How would you feel about that?" I saw his eyes widen at that image. "I'll be gone from here and out of your hair in 10 minutes, I said. "But if you don't back off with Irene and me, I'll be waiting for you outside the main gate tonight. You're a big guy, but I fought bigger." I didn't bother to tell him that they had usually kicked my butt. I had not so much as raised my voice. But I think O'Bannon realized I was deadly serious. I don't think any of my tough talk intimidated him, but I think it made him take a step back and think. He looked at Irene, and I figured he was thinking about his wife, and what I'd said and how she'd have felt and how he'd have felt about that. I saw him look at Ali, and I'm sure that Ali was mutely telling him to back off. So he did. He shrugged and moved to stand by Ali. That gave me a little time to talk to Irene. I was worried about her. I knew she was supporting her mother as well as herself. "Irene, are you going to be okay? Is it just me he's axing, or?" "Thanks, Ross. I think I'm okay." He said he needed to have a meeting with me once you were gone, but it didn't sound threatening or anything like that. He said something about how he would need my help. He's such a jerk. Oh, Ross, this just sucks. I feel terrible for you. I figured by then she'd be okay. As far as Jared knew, there were only 2 people at UniG who knew how to do what we did. I was gone and Irene was the last one standing. Certainly, Jared didn't know squat about EPUB support. He bragged on himself as being a big picture guy, which means that he had no idea of the nuts and bolts operations. The only thing he did know was that when people didn't get their EPUB pubs or got the wrong EPUB pubs, they screamed to higher management, who frowned at him. Without Irene, Jared would be deep in the shits, and not even Jared could be so dense that he didn't know that. We finished packing the 3rd box. I thought, damn, that's too much junk to have accumulated in 6+ years. It was not just from my desk. I had stuff on bookshelves and in a taboret behind my desk. Ali helped me stack and secure the boxes on a rolling cart, and the 2 guards followed me as I wheeled it down the corridor. There was a pretty good complement of folks at their desks, considering it was still during the nominal lunch hour. It was like running a gauntlet of my former fellow workers, most of whom looked pretty shocked. Oh, I had a few enemies who were enjoying seeing me taken down, but on the whole I think most of the people there were unhappy to see me getting the heave-ho. They all knew what an a-hole Jared was. As we went, I heard the guards having a little discussion behind me, with Ali doing most of the talking. When we got out to the parking area, and to my trusty Subaru Outback, O'Bannon sort of apologized. Something about maybe being a little out of line. I put the last of the boxes in the back deck of the Outback, and looked at him. "O'Bannon, don't sweat it. Do me a favor and forget my mouthing off, too. You have your job to do, just like I used to have mine." He looked a little surprised that I was joking about getting canned. I gave him a grin, and he half-grinned back. I reached into the 3rd box and pulled out a half-killed bottle of Jack Daniel's Black. "I don't think it's a good time for me to be around this. You guys make sure it gets to a good home, okay?" Ali took it and shook my hand. "Sorry, Ross. This sucks." I nodded and shrugged. Then O'Bannon offered his hand, and I shook that too. "No hard feelings, man," I said, and meant it. "Me too," he said. I belted myself in and rolled down the window and said, "Don't let that bottle fall into the hands of strangers, guys." They grinned and passed it between them for a ceremonial toast as I backed out. "Hang tough, Ross," Ali said. O'Bannon had started wheeling the cart back toward the building, but as my car came abreast of him, he waved and called, "Good luck, Mr. Camden." So much for my time with UniG. Now I was going to have to look for another job, which wasn't going to be easy. As I drove home, I let myself indulge in my latest little fantasy. Well, one of my non-sexual ones, anyway. I briefly kicked around an idea I'd had about how to publish the EPUB by a form of online self-publication. Actually, it would be what is called publication on demand, or POD. I'd been thinking about how we might do it for UniG. And even without research, I knew there were many big companies in and around the area that had operations like UniG's EPUB. If I could have gotten it in at UniG, I had wondered if UniG might package it as a new UniG service and market it to those companies. I'd gone online and gathered some preliminary information about it, printing costs, and the like. There was a surprising amount of info available, including some websites that went into detail about how to avoid mistakes. I skimmed over those. Now, things had changed. Now that I had been canned, I toyed with the idea of trying to offer the service myself as a consultant. I gave that about 5 minutes of fond thought, and then came back to reality. It was a pipe dream. I didn't have the capital to do something like that, and still pay the bills. Hell, the way Kimberly burned though money, we couldn't survive more than 2-3 months before we'd be broke. I had no idea what resources Kimberly had, but I was going to have to sit her down and tell her she had to pitch in to cover the basic bills. We were married, damn it. That was one of my weaknesses as a husband. I let Kimberly have her way too much. Now, I didn't honestly know if I could count on her and for what. I needed to get a new income stream going and fast. There wasn't a whole lot of new hiring going on in the area, especially for management jobs. I'd been a senior tech writer-editor in pubs before getting promoted to the EPUB manager's job. I knew there were no openings back in pubs. They'd just laid off 2 writers. I knew I had an uphill job hunt ahead of me. I'd be doing well to get a job as a tech writer. And the pay? Well, I'd be lucky to get 60% of what I'd been making at UniG, which had been $65,000. In the meantime, I was hoping I could pick up fairly decent money working through a temp agency. That would make things damn tight in our household. Kimberly was going to scream when she found out that she was going to have to do without a lot of her luxuries, or pay for them herself. Oh, I thought this was going to be a real sweet homecoming. I got home by 1 p.m. and moofed around, doing some cleaning, waiting for Kimberly to come home. I updated my resume. I would be looking for a management job, an editor's job, or a writer's job, so I needed a slightly different slant in my resume for each. I made and printed out the 3 versions of my resume, 50 copies of each. I went online and looked at some job posting sites. Pretty bleak, but I posted my 3 resumes in the appropriate places. 5:30 p.m. came and went. I guessed Kimberly was going to be late again, which wasn't surprising or unusual. She worked late off and on for a week at a time in some erratic non-pattern. She said the booking peaks and valleys were unpredictable. This was another late night, the 3rd night this week, so this was one of those weeks. After 5 years playing the stay-at-home wife, she had finally got bored. She talked to some UniG people she'd worked with before she wound up at EPUB. They brought her into a part-time job at the travel services group. She had some history there before she went into EPUB, and they had no problem hiring her back. Well, it didn't make much difference to the house. It wasn't as though she'd spent much time at home cooking and cleaning, that's for sure. She liked the work, and worked her way up to full-time status. With the hookups to travel agencies, she got deep discounts on airfares and hotel bookings. We had some nice vacations that way. The places were okay, kind of exotic and fancy-schmancy. They were not necessarily where I would have picked to go. They were pricey places where the rich people go, and every location seemed to demand a whole new wardrobe for Kimberly. On the whole, it was costing us money for her to work, or so it seemed to me. Now she managed the travel office. There was more money, supposedly, but you couldn't prove it by me. She insisted on banking her own checks in her own account for her own uses. On the other hand, when she went full-time, I stopped giving her the money out of each of my paychecks for her personal walking around money. She got real pissy about that, but I stood my ground. If she wasn't contributing to the payment of shared bills, she wasn't getting her percentage of my take-home anymore. When Kimberly finally got home, it was about 9. She had a self-satisfied little smirk when she walked in and saw me. And there was something else about her attitude and appearance that I couldn't quite identify. What was that about? I wondered. I told her about losing my job. She did not even try to disguise her contempt. She said she had already eaten and was tired. She went upstairs and made a production of slamming the bedroom door. I wasn't tired, too keyed up from the crappy day's events. And unlike Kimberly, I hadn't eaten a damn thing since breakfast. I pulled together some leftovers and surrounded them sitting at the kitchen table. I was just about to call Irene when she surprised me by calling me, instead, full of news. She said that Jared offered her my job managing the engineering publication support group. She said she'd responded, What group? It takes more than one person to make a group, Mr. Vaughn. Good for her, I thought. She said. I told him I'd take the job, but only if I could hire my own secretary to support me. And I told him I had to have a free hand to hire anyone I wanted, no interference or vetoing from him. I told him that EPUB was absolutely a two-person function, and that if he didn't believe that, he was free to run it by himself. I told him I would find another job. Well, I'll be damned. Bless her spunky little heart. It took a lot of courage to get in Jared's face like that, and her with her mother to support. He didn't like it, she said. He tried to pressure me, but I wasn't budging. Finally, he got exasperated and accused me of not being a team player. I told him I knew what the team needed better than him. I wore him down, Ross. Eventually said he wouldn't interfere. So I told him I was hiring you, Ross. What? Please just hear me out, Ross. I know how hard it'll be for you to get a job these days. The job market is tight. I mean absolutely no disrespect to you by asking you to come work with me. You know and I know that you'll be the real boss and I'll be your assistant, no matter what our titles are. That way we can get the job done for UniG, while you can look around for something better while you have income. Please don't be mad at me. I didn't mean to insult you. Wow, mad at you? I said. Irene, if you were here I'd kiss you. You are a damned gutsy gal. I'll bet you pissed Jared off big time. Oh yeah, but who cares? I told him that it took two people to do the job, no matter what he thought, and that you naturally knew everything I did and could do the support job as well as I had. And with you around to back me up, I would never be in over my head. So he had no choice, she said. But he sets the salaries, so he stuck it to you. He set your salary at what mine had been, $28,000, because you'd be doing my old job. My new salary is $44,000. I don't know what you were making. I was making $65,000, Irene. He still winds up saving $21,000 overall, about as much as he could ever expect. He's getting you on the cheap. Any new manager brought in would have demanded at least $50,000 to $55,000. I paused for a second. Irene? Yes? Thank you. I can't say how much I appreciate what you've done. I couldn't say all that was in my heart. It wouldn't be right. I know, she said softly. Thank you, Ross. You're a great guy. Good night. I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, and Ross? Yes? I expect coffee on my desk every morning, she chuckled. Yeah, right. Like you ever got me coffee, Irene. I laughed. You remind me of a Dickens novel. Which is? Great Expectations. Good night, Irene. I heard her giggle as she broke the connection. When I came back to work the next day, I just borrowed that same cart and wheeled my one loan box back in. I'd done some serious triage on the accumulation last night and tossed out or stowed the non-essentials. Later, when I got my email accounts reactivated, I found an email from Jared. He was still trying to screw me. It informed me that I was coming in designated as a part-timer at 100% of full-time hours. The 100% part-timer dodge was an accounting fiction. It meant that I'd work full-time, but get no health insurance or leave or other benefits. That had saved Jared over $15,000 in benefits that wouldn't count against his overhead. When Irene read that over my shoulder, she went ballistic. Damn, both Jared and I were learning that that woman had grit. She scribbled a 4-word letter of resignation on a 2x2 post-it. Words 3 and 4 were, I quit. Word 2 was a second-person singular pronoun. Word 1 was an Anglo-Saxon verb that rhymes with duck. Starts with the alphabet F, or pretty much exactly. She marched into his office and stuck it in the middle of his computer monitor, interrupting him in some chatroom cyber kissy face game. I guess he sat there stunned for a few minutes. When he came down looking for her, she was emptying out her desk. I was over at my desk repacking my box. That scared the piss out of Jared. If she left, he'd have no one who could run the operation, except me, and from what he could see me doing, I had other plans that didn't include saving him. Worse yet, if I stayed, he'd have to promote me back to manager, and that would be at my terms. And I'd just hire back Irene, if she'd be willing to come. TechLit was among his most important responsibilities. He himself didn't have the faintest idea of how to do it, and he just fired me, and now he'd have to explain to his boss about firing me, hiring me, and promoting me, all in 24 hours. Well, he folded and asked what she wanted. She demanded that she got a raise to $50,000 and that I got bumped up to $40,000 with full bennies. Non-negotiable. Jared huffed and puffed, so she just went back to packing. Jared folded again. So it wound up that his payroll costs were improved by a whopping $3,000. You're pretty smart. Do the math. So that recouped some of my lost salary, but when Kimberly finally got home that night and I told her about it, she gave me that same odd kind of knowing smirk as before and went into the bedroom. Damn, Had all that contempt been there all along and I was just now seeing it? I tried to use the phone to call out for pizza, since neither of us was apparently interested in cooking. She was on the line when I picked up and she just bansheed. I'm on the phone, for Christ's sake. Now how am I supposed to know when another person is already on the line? It's not like an office phone where you have multiple lines, and the little lit indicator shows that a line is active. I went out to the Subaru and drove down to Papa John's to get dinner, pondering the ups and downs of these past 2 days. I had to laugh about the crazy twists and turns of luck these past 24 hours. I was feeling relieved and pretty good and figured I was lucky, and so I thought it was time to challenge fate. I parked down the row from Papa John's, walked into the next door convenience store, and bought a whole 2 weeks worth of plays in the X&X Millions lottery. As play numbers, I used all the salaries that had been tossed around. In numeric order, I marked in 28 for $28,000. Irene's original salary and my first new salary, 40. My current new salary, 44. Irene's first new salary, 50. Irene's current new salary, 65. My old salary, with the X&X ball number being 3 for the big whoop $3,000 savings that Jared got after all the dust had settled. The outside display card said that the lottery winnings were up to about $71 million, and the bi-weekly drawing was tonight. I put the lottery ticket in my wallet and went into the carryout. 10 minutes later, I toted the pizza boxes to the car and headed home, with the smell of hot pepperoni making my mouth water. That pizza was destined to get damned cold before anyone ate any of it that night. When I waltzed in, calling out that I had dinner, Kimberly was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of bourbon in front of her and the bottle right within reach. Now neither of us was much of a drinker, mostly a glass of wine or a beer now and then. The hard stuff was for guests when we entertained, which was never, so I stopped stocking it some time ago. That bottle of Jack Daniels I'd given away back in the office was something I had taken away from a secret boozer at the company. I caught him hitting it out back one day. He wound up getting fired anyway, and I had never gotten around to disposing of it until that going-away chat with Ollie and his buddy. But there Kimberly sat with a half-empty tumbler. She had been sipping at it. Her face was splotchy red. I idly wondered where the booze had come from. She ignored the pizza box and stared down into her glass of courage. "Ross, we have to talk." And there it was. I sat down across from her, wondering what the hell was going on. "We have to talk" in a marriage is the equivalent of incoming when you're in combat. I assumed she'd been trying to work up the courage for who knows how long to say what was on her mind. The ethanolic fortitude must have been just what she needed. What she had to say was short and decidedly non-sweet. "I'm filing for divorce," she said. "This is a no-fault state, and all I have to put down for grounds is that there are irreconcilable differences." I was what? Absolutely blindsided? Gobsmacked? I sputtered and stumbled over my own words, looking wildly about and finally staring at her. She was looking at me, but was not seeing me. I felt once more what I had sensed before. She was there, but not there. This had been one of those non-sex weeks, but it had been barely a week since she had been passionate. What had happened? Why was this happening? I tried to get her to tell me what was going on. What was wrong? What had I done to make her want to leave? I asked her, couldn't we talk things out, get some counseling and all that? I asked her what she wanted me to do. "Just let it go, Ross, we're done," was what she finally said. I know I wasn't very coherent, but it didn't matter. Kimberly had made up her mind and had already packed her bags. "I'll be staying with a friend," she announced. "I'll come back for the rest of my stuff on the weekend. This is a community property state. You can have the house, but when the court does the property split, you'll have to sell it and split the equity, or keep it and pay me half of the equity. Either way I get my money, so I don't really care. There is nothing here for me." Apparently that included me. "Ross, I'm filing for irreconcilable differences, but the real reason is irreconcilable boredom. If it weren't for the trips I got us, you'd sit on your dead carcass all the time. All you want to do is talk and read and go for walks and have sex. I want some freedom and nightlife and a lot more fun in my life. It'll take just over 6 months for the final decree. I'll be filing next Monday." She seemed to be pretty much up on divorce law, I thought. When your brain is frozen, you always seem to notice little irrelevancies. After she left, I sat staring at the bottle, sorely tempted. But I put it away and called Irene, who by then seemed to be my only real friend. I don't know what she was doing, but when I said I needed a friend, she said she'd be right over. And she was. Her car pulled up in 25 minutes. We sat down and ate reheated pizza, and I told her what had happened. We were sitting on my couch by then, and as I got to Kimberly's last words I lost it and teared up. Not very manly of me, but hell, I told you I could be girly man-like. Then the uptight proper Miss Irene Ellison drew me into her arms and pulled my face down to her glorious bosom. But I didn't even notice. I was too busy crying. Also not very manly, but what did I care? If Irene took me for a wuss, so what? My marriage maybe hadn't been all that great lately, but I went into it full of love for Kimberly. How could I not weep over what had happened to that? I still had residual feelings for my wife. Even then, old feelings don't shut off in a few seconds. They're more like a giant flywheel, spinning with a huge amount of rotational momentum. All those feelings were built up over the years. Eventually the wheel will slow down, and finally it will stop. But it takes time, unless someone applies brakes. I told Irene everything. Eventually I got to the sex, in that odd on-again, off-again pattern, and how it had been pretty good, I thought. But with newfound hindsight, I could now recognize it as fairly perfunctory. Any two healthy people could have had what we had, but there had been an ingredient missing. And as I pondered it, with my face between Irene's large, soft, warm melons, I recognized the missing ingredient. Love. From Kimberly's side. No, along with the absence of love, was the absence of Kimberly. She had been there in the flesh, but not in spirit. I had been a convenient sex partner. As I came back into the here and now, I realized how nice it felt to be where I was. Without thinking, I started nuzzling her neck. Irene didn't do or say anything. I felt her sharp intake of breath, and still she did nothing. Then I came to my senses and realized that this was Irene. I suddenly came up for air, and I'd bet my face was as red as Irene's. Nothing more happened, and nothing ever was said about it. We both sat back a little bit apart and continued to talk. I began going over the past year or so of the marriage, just talking it all out to my friend. There had been a subtly slow erosion of warmth and openness. Kimberly had never been careful about money, but in the recent run-up to this bombshell, in hindsight, she had gone profligate. I'd looked up the recent credit card statements, and they had a lot of added charges. Irene told me I'd be wise to do a number of things to protect myself, like canceling out our joint charge cards. I could do most of it over the internet, as long as I could pay them off. All I had to do was log in properly, and I could move money around. Once Kimberly had started putting her paychecks in her own accounts, I had phased out our joint checking and savings accounts. Now both were in my name. I had to pay off as much as I could of the credit card balances, which flatlined the cash I had available in savings. I was left with one Visa card that still had a balance, but it had some room on it, and I was able to get her name off it. I would pay off the rest of her charges in a few months, and it left me one card that I could use. I could do it all over the internet, although I had to take some phone calls to confirm some of the moves. They were all 24-hour operations. Taking the confirmation callbacks on the home phone number of record and answering the little security questions got everything done. I called the 24-hour classified ad line of our big local daily newspaper. I dictated one of those ads about no longer being responsible for the debts of Kimberly Brown Camden, nay, Kimberly Jade Brown, and charged it to my one remaining Visa card. Then I got a 24-hour locksmith service to come change the door locks, and I reprogrammed the garage door opener code. I left a message on Kimberly's cell phone that she would have to get me to open up the house when she came by to get her stuff. She didn't call back or respond otherwise. As we waited for the locksmith, Irene and I continued to talk. I mentioned that bipolar sex thing, having sex on one week or so, and then being cold-shouldered the next. Irene thought that was strange and wondered if there was anything behind it. Ross, you say she didn't say anything about another man in her life, but I'm suspicious. If there were problems, I'd think she'd want a separation. But she is going straight for divorce. It seems like her strategy's all mapped out, and that makes me think there's another man involved. Call it my just being attuned to the devious female mind. I had nothing to say to that. We sat up late, drinking wine. We came to no great conclusions, but I appreciated her company and her sympathy. It got late, and with the wine in her, eventually Irene wound up crashing on my couch. After my gaffe, I was the complete gentleman. She got up sometime in the middle of the night and let herself out to go home. So I began my third stint living alone. This time was the hardest. Back when I had never been married before, I had no idea what being married could be like. I wasn't together with Laura long enough to really settle into married life. All I remember of it was great sex and betrayal. Oh yeah, betrayal. My mind went back to that fiasco of a marriage. The place I went to for my first real job was not exactly a warm, welcoming town. It was no Mayberry, RFD. It was closed and insular, and not all that friendly to outsiders, and I was an outsider, not one of them. After I'd been there 5 months, I met and fell in love with Laura Davis. Laura was a beautiful woman, and I was just stocky old Ross. It was almost like something out of a storybook, and in true storybook fashion, Laura smiled upon my attempts to woo her. I set aside my feelings of unworthiness, courted her, and won her hand in marriage, as the storybooks say. Well, marry in haste. Repent at leisure, as they also say. Damn it. Why are they always right? Much too late to do me any good. I learned that my blushing bride had been something close to the town bicycle. Apparently damned near every man she met was taken with her, and she was taken by a lot of them. I was new, and an outsider, and didn't know anyone there very well, or at least not anyone who could or would have tipped me off. No one said anything to me about her reputation before our wedding day. Not the people I worked with, and not any of my neighbors. We got married in a church full of people who had either known Nicole in the biblical sense, or knew someone who had. There were some odd things said during the reception toasts, but they sailed over my head. I came home early one day after we'd been married less than a month and found Laura entertaining two of her old boyfriends. Physically. Simultaneously. The police came and took me away for assaulting the two louts. I'm no Chuck Norris, but I can take care of myself in a fair fight. In that fight, I was outnumbered 2-1. But the odds were weighted in my favor since my opponents had their pants and briefs down around their ankles when we started. Luckily, the magistrate was a believer in old-style family values and justice and ruled it was justifiable something or other. Mayhem, maybe? I put those two guys in the hospital. As I waited for my divorce to become final, then everyone came forward and told me all about Lara's history. Well, thanks, but the timing was a bit off. You want to know what was funny? Laura kept calling me, from the day I caught her and moved out until the day I dropped my old cell phone off a bridge on the way out of town. I never took her calls. If she called me from an unfamiliar caller ID number, I'd hang up as soon as I heard her voice. She wrote me letters. I'd like to be able to tell you I tore them up unread, but that'd be a lie. I read one of them out of morbid curiosity. She wrote that she had married me because I turned her on and was a guy with a future, unlike all of those ex-jocks and slackers that she had been messing around with. Now get this. She wrote that once we were married, she began to realize that she was falling in love for the first time in her life. She had the gall to write that. But she also said that she had such a hunger for sex that no matter how ardent I was, she would still want more. I guess it was like Chinese food or something. You know, how an hour later you're hungry again. So she had continued screwing around behind my back before, during, and after our wedding day. She said that she had just been too stupid and immature to realize that she had to stop messing around, and had to do something about her hungers. The guys had kept calling her, and she'd just gone along the way she had always done. It was just meaningless sex, she wrote. Why do people say that? Meaningless sex. It sure as hell was meaningful to me. Well, as I said, I wasn't married to Laura long enough to learn what being married is really like. But I had had 5 fairly good years out of 6 with Kimberly, and I enjoyed them. They taught me that I liked the companionship and everything that went with that. It was not just the sex, although the sex was an important part of it. It was having someone there who cared for me. Not just screwing in bed, but waking up comfortably entwined with a familiar warm presence. Companionship. Friendship. Knowing that someone loved me, no matter how shittily the rest of the world was behaving. Even as shocked and angry as I was right now, I knew I could not be happy as a single, not for the rest of my life. But it sure was beginning to look as if the only women I seemed to be able to attract were betrayers. Or that there was something wrong with me that drove women into betrayal. Well, okay, that wasn't true for Laura. She was simply a 304, but it sure looked like it for Kimberly. To make things worse, Kimberly was still working at UniG in the travel office, and I had to chicken around, trying to avoid her. It was too soon to even pretend that I was getting over her, or getting completely out of being in love with her. There was a lot of pain and a big void inside. Someone in a movie once used the term, soul-sick. I kind of felt like that. The flywheel still had a lot of angular momentum and was still spinning. I brooded. I had obviously been a big flop as a husband. In hindsight, I thought I could see dozens of ways that I could have done better. Been more attentive to her needs, been more open about my inner thoughts, things like that. Why did I take the most important person in my life for granted? I was brooding on that one day when Irene and I went to lunch one day. I happened to mention something to her about all that. Well, I guess I was wallowing in self-pity and guilt, or trying to, and she shot me down big time. Irene said that all that was bullshit. When did Kimberly ever think of your needs, Ross? She said, you struggled to pay the bills, and she kept all her pay for herself. She had opportunities for you both to travel, but did she ever book places that you wanted to see? Not that I can recall. Anyone can look back and see things they wish they had done better. Hell, we're none of us perfect. But from everything I could see, or anyone else who knows the two of you, you were a damned fine husband. Kimberly was a drone as a wife, in addition to being 6 kinds of a fool and probably a cheating woman. And believe you me, Ross, there are plenty of women at UniG who think you are a pretty special guy. I said, what? Really? Who? Never you mind, she said, with an odd look in her eye. But her first comments turned my thinking around. Now I wasn't all that hot to defend Kimberly's behavior so much, that's for sure. I was flattered that Irene thought so highly of me. I decided not to ask for more details about the legions of UniG women who might be interested in me. That seemed to be something that Irene regretted telling me. When I thanked her for her good opinion of me, Irene blushed. From our friendlier relationship and the conversations that came out of it, I'd learned that she was 30 and had never been married. Since college, she had been taking care of her mother, Daisy, who had a sharp mind confined in a slowly degenerating body. It was one of those conditions where the nerves that control the muscles were wearing out and could not be regenerated. Irene never said whether there had ever been any men in her life. That part of her personal life was still off limits. That bipolar thing I'd mentioned, the on-again, off-again sex with Kimberly, seemed to fascinate Irene, and she'd been pestering me for specifics. At first I admitted that my memory was not good about stuff like that, but Irene asked about my planners. My planners? It's funny the things that are right under your nose and you never think of them. I always kept a daily planner, a little book tucked in my shirt pocket. I started it to keep track of business appointments and deadlines and the like, but I soon found myself using it a little bit like a diary. If something happened out of the ordinary, even if it was something personal, I'd make a little note. Like a pack rat, I'd hung on to all the filled-up planners. I figured I could never know when I might have to reconstruct something for a long-ago expense account or even the IRS. We dug them out and went through them for the past year. By now, Irene was an almost daily visitor after work. I offered to stop by her place, but she said she preferred coming over to mine. That was okay with me. Anything to have her company. Like I said, she was my best friend. We figured Kimberly's little mystery out, or rather Irene did, over the next few weeks. Since she was certain there was another man involved, it informed her search for clues. At first I was not on board with her theory, what with all of our past discussions of fidelity. But Irene was pretty good at planting seeds of doubt. I had begun to wonder about this friend that she had gone to live with. I could not name a single female friend that Kimberly had ever spoken of. There had never been any socializing or girls' nights out. I wasn't about to go sleuthing and following her, but Irene told me that no one among her friends at UniG could name a gal pal of Kimberly's. So who was she living with? Surely, Kimberly could not be with another man, could she? Irene solved the puzzle. Her resolution traced back about a year to a few months after Kimberly had gone back to work booking travel for UniG, picking apart the changed pattern. The bipolar thing. Irene kept at it until she nailed it. I described Kimberly as a woman who liked sex, and our marriage had been very active in that department. Until around that time. About a year ago, Kimberly got herself a lover, she said. Only he was not available for sex every week. Either he was married and had to spend some quality time with his family, or he traveled, which meant he was in sales. When he was available, that would usually be for a whole week, and she'd tell you she was working late. That was bullshit. She was spending the extra time in the sack with him at a convenient motel. When she'd been with him, she'd come home all satisfied and make excuses to cut you off. She didn't need sex with you, she was sated. But when he was away or unavailable, she'd condescend to sexing with you. You've been playing second fiddle, Ross. You were her economic support. Your income provided her a comfortable home. As soon as she thought that you'd lost your earning power, she went a plan B. She dumped you and went to live full-time with the guy. So she's divorcing you. Once she'd made the decision for the break, the die was cast and you getting your job back was irrelevant. I wasn't able to think up anything better as an explanation. Shit. She had been unfaithful for a year or more. Kimberly had been a tolerator rather than a participating love partner. All I'd been good for to Kimberly was to fill the gap, nothing more. She'd been using me as a warm sex toy when the better option wasn't available. And after the way that she had talked about and vowed about fidelity, now that she was sure she was on to Kimberly's game, Irene went into full detective mode. She used her girls' network contacts to check out the sales department schedules and figured out what salesmen were away on the string of nights when I had been getting lucky. Once they knew what to look for, it wasn't hard to spot the guy. The one guy whose schedule matched was one of the top salesmen, Randy Carson. Irene said she'd never seen the guy, but the story was that Randy was a real handsome hunky dude with a bit of a rep as a player among the ladies. The single girls he'd played with said he was quite the man between the sheets, and well hung. And according to her informants, he was a hell of a salesman. Between his commissions and bonuses on top of his salary, he made twice what I'd been making before I got fired. I was plotting under my breath about how to ambush Randy Carson with a 2x4, but Irene could read my mind. She told me to forget it. It would make your bruised ego feel better for a little while, but it wouldn't solve your problems. It would just add to them. Look, Kimberly lied and cheated on you. You want her back? I shook my head. The cheating was beyond decisive. Okay, so what else does it get you? Assault charges. Even if they take everything into consideration and you get probation or community service instead of jail time, you'll have a criminal record. And there's another thing. Now, Ross, I have to be honest here. I don't want to be bruising your ego any more than necessary, but even with a 2x4, if Randy Carson manages to avoid your first swing, you'd be in trouble. Randy's a seriously large man and a former college offensive lineman. I'd hate to have to come visiting you in the hospital, if you get my drift. I'm sorry if that makes you feel disrespected. I have great respect for you, Ross, but I'm trying to talk reality here. She was giving me a hug as she was disrespecting me, and it didn't hurt my ego as much as you'd think it would. I really liked the way she plastered herself against me. Naturally, I put my arms around her. I thought, well, there went my fantasies of kicking his butt in front of Kimberly. To further take the sting out of her words, she leaned forward and brushed her lips against mine in a sweet, tender, completely unexpected kiss. How could I be pissed off at her after that? Even though I still felt that she wasn't giving me credit for being able to handle myself. I thought, tell that to Lara's bed buddies. But reality was reality. In this I knew she was right. The bottom line about Kimberly was that for all of her strong convictions and bitter experiences and vows about faithfulness, all it took to seduce my wife was a skillful seducer, a bigger tool, possibly some sexual techniques, and a bigger income than me. I didn't figure that Kimberly would have blown up our marriage just to be a kept woman. I suspected that Randy was dangling the old carrot of a marriage down the road. In addition to whatever else he was dangling, I was trying to adjust, but not feeling very good about myself on almost every level. A failure as a husband, a two-time loser at marriage, and a proven also-ran in the sack department, it seemed like. Irene and I went out to lunch almost every day now, and my head was so far up but I never even noticed how differently we were getting along. Not at first, but things were improving, gradually. Every so often I would lose myself in my work and could spend a whole day without feeling down on myself. Then, on this one day, we were in the small production floor snack room, and someone said something about Kimberly and her new guy Randy Carson, and it got to me. We were still married for Christ's sake, and she was openly shacking up with the guy. And I was under strict orders about even thinking about 2x4s. So on that day I froze up and shut down my first hot reactions. I quietly got up and went back to my desk and soldiered the rest of the workday. But Irene had seen my face when I heard that remark, and she watched me all that day. Then she simply would not let me go off to my home alone at quitting time. She invited me out to dinner and spent the evening trying to cheer me up. Ross, you are a much better person than her, she said. What she is doing is giving her body to a guy she thinks will be a better meal ticket. What else is that but prostituting? And you have it all over him, too. Randy Carson may be a top salesman, but he does that on his aggressiveness and charm, things that he was born with. You were born with a quieter manner, but you are a decent, charming, highly intelligent man. And everything that you have worked hard for. Randy breezes into an office, and everybody immediately likes him, and they are willing to do business with him. He has never shown any evidence of having an original thought, except maybe when it comes to seduction. You? Well, I've never seen anyone who was as good a problem solver as you. And what about all those ideas you have about changing EPUB? Where do we stand on that now? Well, she knew how to change the subject and get me going, that was for sure. I did have some ideas, and they were pretty novel for a conservative place like UniG. I knew from bitter experience that none of them would ever fly as long as Jared was in charge, but I kept working on them, refining them. They were damn good ideas, I thought. And talking about them to a sympathetic listener took my mind off the other stuff I kept thinking about, all the negative stuff about myself. As I said before, I had been thinking about the possibilities of online publishing. Ross's note, the stuff that comes now is maybe kind of boring if all you're interested in is the personal stuff. Feel free to skip it unless you're really into publication detail. Okay, you have been warned. The way we did our documents at UniG was a traditional model. We had all of our printer-ready electronic files stored across town with a sheet-fed press printing service, Acme Printing. When we got down to a certain level of inventory of a document, I'd get a tickler email from the inventory database and would call Acme up and order a press run, usually around 250 to 500 copies. It worked, but it was pricey. Small press runs were expensive per copy. So why didn't we order a more cost-effective run, like about 10,000 copies? In printing, the bigger the run, the lower the cost per copy. Well, this is engineering publications, and one thing constant about EPUB is that it changes all the time. That's because the products and services that were documented in the EPUB were always being tinkered with. Customer feedback might identify a problem, and that would get our engineers busy on a fix. Or a parts supplier might discontinue a part that we used, and we would have to use an alternative. Or someone might just spot an error in our EPUB. The QA in pubs was sometimes sloppy, and there was no way that Irene and I combined could catch all the errors, although we did our best. Things like that happened fairly often, and that would change the parts lists and the technical manuals and often the user's guide instructions. So the documents had to be changed, and anything still on the shelves as inventory for the previous model widget would then become obsolescent. At least some of it would have to be tossed into the recycling bins. And that wasn't cost-effective either. And to complicate things, just because we changed the version of the widget that we were now offering didn't mean that our customers automatically changed out and bought the latest version to replace the earlier one. That was too costly for most of them, and so the other model widgets that hadn't yet been replaced still had to have their original documents available. Sooner or later they would probably be replaced, but in the meantime we had to support all of the widget versions that were still out there in use. That's what I meant by obsolescent instead of obsolete. We had a lot of slightly different versions of the same documents sitting on those shelves, taking up a lot of space. For a two-man operation, we took up a big chunk of storage space. That was why we were located down in the big, cavernous manufacturing spaces. There was no room for our inventory anywhere else. Okay, that's how we've been doing it. My big idea was in several parts. One was changing over from traditional printing with Acme Printing to a new business model using a spin-off of Print on Demand, or POD. There were printing services that could take print-ready files and print out documents using laser printing technology, just like in your home printer. The finished product could be collated and bound, so that what fell out of the output tray was a finished book. The key was that they could do it at a fixed unit cost. Say a POD manual would cost $4.78 to produce, including the binding. So one copy would cost $4.78, 10 copies, $47.80, and 10,000 copies, $4,780. The same price per book no matter how many you printed. On the one hand, there were no economies of scale. It didn't get cheaper the bigger the press run, but the basic cost, even for a bound copy, was pretty reasonable to begin with, and the big press runs were no good for us anyway, because of the changing nature of EPUB. That was the essence of POD, but I wanted to take it a step further. I didn't want the POD printing service to print the documents. I wanted a user, like a client, to be able to download the electronic print-ready files so that they could print them themselves. It was rare that a modern company would not have a decent high-speed printer. But if they didn't want to do the printing, or couldn't do it for some reason, we could go back to the classic POD model I just described. We could ship them a POD-printed copy, but we wouldn't really do that, because of my second idea, which was to do away with the fixed binding completely. We would repackage all of our products in multiple ring binders. The front cover would have a clear plastic sleeve, so the current cover of the document could be slid into the pocket. That way the user could see the date of the document and the revision number. That cover would be downloadable for printing on a color printer. The guts of the manual or user's guide or whatever would be available on our website as a downloadable file. All a client had to do was download it, print it on multiple whole paper, and put it in the binders. We'd keep updating the current files and let them all be accessible via our EPUB website, a tab off the big UniG website. We had records of what each customer had, so there were guidelines to make certain that whatever a client downloaded would be the latest version for their widgets. We'd send email notifications to all our clients whenever we made a change, so they could download the latest and greatest. Hell, we'd even supply the first year's worth of sturdy paper stock for them to print it on. We'd still have to keep some hard copy inventory on hand, but most of the customers could be served from online. I'd roughly priced it out. Once the system was up and running, our EPUB services cost would be far lower. But what someone like Jared would fixate on was the high startup cost for the binders and that first year's paper stock supply for each customer. Naturally, Jared would never go for it. Hell, he wouldn't even read my write-up to judge it. So it was a pipe dream unless someone would do us a favor and run Jared over in a crosswalk. I harbored a few fantasies along those lines myself, but that's not my kind of thing. And Irene would not have stood for it, anyway. I was getting very frustrated. No 2x4s and no running Jared over. Irene was not letting me have any fun. That was a great evening of dinner and pipe dreaming on the day when I had Kimberly and Randy Carson flaunted in my face. Irene kept me talking and thinking of everything but Kimberly and her a-hole lover for most of the evening. Her company alone made it a nice interlude. I also had drunk a bit more than my usual amount. Pipe dreaming is thirsty work. I insisted I was okay to drive, not at all tipsy. But when I was driving home, Kimberly's deceit and betrayal and her blatant flaunting of her sexual relationship with Randy Carson. All of it all came back up and hit me. I could hardly see to drive with my suddenly blurry vision. I barely made it to my driveway. I didn't realize it, but Irene had followed me in her car to make sure I got home okay. When she saw me pull in and just sit slumped and crying over the wheel, she came up and bullied me out of the car. She got me walked inside and seated on the couch. I'd been putting off the hurt and anger and sense of betrayal for too long, and now it was unmanning me. I felt alone and rejected and useless and simply defeated. I sat with my face in my hands, numb and inert over my hurt and grief over Kimberly. Those wasted years and that now unrequited love I'd had for her. All I could think of was the mockery that she had made of my faithful support and love and care while she plotted this and cheated around on me and laughed behind my back, she and her lover. After all those solemn promises of fidelity, Irene held me close and comforted me, once again cradling my head on her chest. I'm a little bit fuzzy about what happened then. Somewhere in there her blouse became open. I don't know who opened it. Somewhere in there her bra disappeared. I don't know whose idea that was. Somewhere in there our clothing was gone. I don't remember how that happened. And then somewhere in there we were both gasping and I was having sex with her. Somewhere in there we both climaxed and then fell asleep, all wrapped up together in a lover's cuddle. The next morning was Friday, and when I awoke Irene was gone. The condition of the bed proved to me that it was no dream. After I got up and lurched into the kitchen, I found a note. Ross, you were so hurting and lost that I lowered my barriers and let myself go to ease your pain. You are still married and I know that you don't love me. What we did was consolation and caring friendship and nothing more. Please don't think less of me for it. I don't want to lose your friendship and the wonderful working relationship that we have had. We have to act as if nothing happened. Please, do not ever speak of this, even by the slightest hint. Please, do not change the way you treat me. If you do, I will have to leave Uni G and never see you again. Your very good friend, Irene. I got into work a little late, and our shared office was empty. I spotted a glowing red indicator for voicemail and found that Irene had called in sick. I started to call her to make sure that she was okay, that we were okay. But then I realized that calling her would tell her that I couldn't accept the status quo before last night, as she so desperately wanted. It was the opposite of what she wanted in her note. She was an employee. She was taking a sick day. That was her right. So I left it at that. Without her help, I was busy all day. That day, Kimberly chose to escalate her campaign of flaunting. She came by with Randy. She was all false smiles and said she had to tell me some minor thing about the divorce. She could have sent me an email or left a voicemail or stuck a note on my door. But that wouldn't have done what she wanted, which was to rub my nose in her affair. Carson was a seriously big dude, just as described, and he grinned at me to show how much he was enjoying pounding it into my wife every night. And she had her own smirk to know how much she was enjoying having it pounded into her. It took every fiber of my restraint not to let them see how much they were getting to me. After they swaggered off, I had to work several hours more to get everything done in Irene's absence. At the last, I ran so late that I had to go to the airport to send out EPUB in the late FedEx pickup of the day. The house seemed awfully empty when I finally got home. And it wasn't Kimberly I was missing. That weekend I had run through dozens of scenarios about where I was going from here, or where we might be going from here. Assuming that Irene even came back to work, I had fears that she might email in her resignation to get away from me. My very good friend Irene came back to work Monday and gave me a tentative version of the normal smile that I had seen 1,000 times. Never was it more welcome. I breathed a sigh of relief that I hadn't lost her. I knew that Kimberly was history and decided I should take the necessary legal steps to protect myself. She had told me that we were a community property state, so most of what we had made while we were married would be split down the middle. There was not much that either of us had brought into the marriage. I checked with the online legal advice service that was part of our UniG benefits package, and all that Kimberly had said was true. Oh, she and her shyster lawyer might bitch about my use of the money in savings, but since it went to pay off joint accounts, they didn't have much of a complaint. After the episode that we never spoke of, Irene was a bit more reserved and we had reverted to our old behavior. We didn't go out to lunch and dinner, and she had stopped coming over after work. Each night, the house was empty, and again, it wasn't Kimberly's presence that I missed. It was slowly dawning on me that Irene was taking a larger and larger role in my thoughts. I remembered the sex, yes. Lord, yes. I may not have been clear on how we got there, but I vividly remembered what there was like. But I mostly remembered her smiling, lovely face across my kitchen table as she laughed at one of my lame jokes. I'd said that she was plain unless she was smiling. Now I wasn't even sure of that. but I knew that I liked looking at her, no matter what her expression. I missed looking at her outside of our work time. I missed her as my only good friend. There was a degree of separation caused by my thoughtless behavior. I had no desire to cook for one. I was practically living on pizza and subs and Chinese carryout. Sometimes I called for delivery, but mostly I stopped by on my way home. On one of those days that I stopped by for a large Papa John's pepperoni lovers pizza, the lot was almost full, so I had to park at the end of the strip mall. I was passing the convenience store and saw that the winning X&X Millions payout had dropped down to $10 million, the starting over number. Someone had won the big one. I was on my way home in my pepperoni-perfumed car when the thought came to me that I should check the published winning number. I got home and went to the X&X Millions website. You'll never guess what the winning number was. Okay, maybe you would. Yep, 28-40-44-50-65, and the X&X ball number, 3. Exactly the numbers on the slip in my wallet. Or so I thought, but I was too shocked to believe it. I was freaking excited out of my mind, but I didn't have anyone to share the news with. Certainly not Kimberly, and Irene was still in her shell about anything other than work. I thought about that, then said screw it. I picked up the phone and called Irene's home number. She would know it was me from caller ID. Ross? She said guardedly. Irene, please hear me out. I know that we are keeping everything strictly business, and I respect that and have honored that. But something has come up, something that is so freaking extraordinary that I can't get a handle on it. I need to talk to you. I need your help. You're the best friend I have. Can I come over? There was a pause. Then, no. I'll come there. I heard her car pull up and was opening her car door before she had turned the ignition off. She smiled at my antsy behavior. I led her inside, so full of excitement that I was practically dancing around her. I said, okay, Irene, I just want you to look at two things. What is on the computer screen, and what is on this slip of paper? She sat. She looked, and she said, Jesus, Ross, is this for real? That's why I asked you to come over. I'm too shook up to believe that I'm reading the numbers right. Well, you sure as hell are. You've won the lottery, Ross. Congratulations. She forgot her reserve and threw her arms around me. I had an insane urge to kiss her, really kiss her, but I stuffed that urge right back down. I settled for that big, tight, well-cushioned hug. I didn't know what to do from that point. I had been so sure that I was misreading the numbers that I hadn't dared think beyond getting her to vet them. Irene realized that I was stuck, and her cool thinking took over. She went on the website and poked around to see how many winning tickets there were. In other words, how many people had those same 6 numbers. Everything was transparent on the computer database if you poked around enough. How many winning tickets were sold, and where had they been purchased? The first answer, 1. Me. The second answer was, at the 7-Eleven next to the Papa John's. The website said that I had to turn in the winning ticket no later than 180 days from the date of the drawing, which was August 24th, 07. 180 days later was February 20th, 08. Ross, what's the final date of your divorce? I had to think. Well, Kimberly's lawyer's guy had me served with the divorce papers, and I signed them as soon as I got them. Hell, what possible reason would I have had to try to delay the divorce? The effective date of the divorce would be 6 months from the date of filing of the signed copies, which was August 27th, 07. So that would be February 27th, 08, I said. Well, looks like you and Kimberly are both going to be pretty well off, Irene said. The lottery winnings will be a joint asset of your marriage and will be split 50-50 in your divorce settlement. Hell, I yelled. No way. Hell, she didn't even stick around for the pizza that night. Irene looked at me calmly, and I backed off. Irene, I'm sorry, but I can't stand to think of those two sharing this. She smiled, and again, I valued her calm nature. She took no offense at my outburst. She knew me so well and let my excesses slide. I looked at her, once again realizing that I had missed her since that night. And not because of that night. That night was an aberration. I just missed her friendship. I just had to say something. Irene, this is maybe not the best time for me to bring this up, but I feel an emptiness in my life. What's missing is you. I miss you. I miss talking over lunch and over dinner. I understand that you don't feel safe being here with me. That's one reason why I think you had better leave. But I wish we could get together in safe situations so we can talk as the friends that I hope we still are. She smiled. I'd like that too, Ross. You have no idea how much I miss our talks. And you. Then she lifted her head, struck by something. You said that's one reason I should leave. What's the other? I waved my hand dismissively. I don't want to say. I don't want to get you involved. Ross, like you said, I'm your friend. Tell me. Irene, What I'm thinking about is almost certainly illegal as hell. I don't want to jeopardize you. I don't care much about myself. I have nothing to lose. The only person I'm responsible for me is me. But you have someone counting on you for support. I can't let my anger and resentment get you in trouble. I care too much for you to let that happen. I care for you maybe more than I should. And I'm sorry that I'm getting into a touchy subject here. At that I would have thought she'd be upset, but I didn't see upset on her face. I didn't know how to read the expression there. Ross, I am your friend. Maybe I am the best friend that you have. You said that, remember? I'm proud of that. I will not leave you alone if you have a problem. I want to help you. I took a deep breath and explained. The problem is the calendar. If I don't claim the prize by February 20th, 08, the ticket expires and the winnings go back into the lottery pool. The 180-day limitation is ironclad. And that's 7 days before the divorce is final. I explained that I'd done some advanced snooping on Wikipedia about divorce law. There were a lot of powerful reasons why a divorce decree is extremely hard to expedite. The legal rationale was that it gave the disputants a reasonable period of time in which to reduce their anger and consider the possibility of reconciliation, which was good for the family unit, which was a goal of the conservatives who dominated the state legislature. Sure, if I were wealthy or well-connected, there would probably be ways to shorten the time for the final decree. I was neither wealthy nor well-connected, so there were none of those ways for me. The lottery deadline was February 20th, 08, and the divorce decree was February 27th, 08. I was screwed by 7 days. See, no matter what, I'd be a moderately rich man in community property when the divorce was final, so that'd make Kimberly and her a-hole salesman lover moderately half-rich. Community property. Goddamn it, it just isn't right, I raged. She lied and cheated and demeaned me, and made me a cuck, and then they laughed at me, to my face. And now they get to profit? I brooded over crazy scenarios. I would get a fake ID and show up at the lottery offices in a disguise. Irene pointed out that the winnings had to be either deposited in a bank or issued as a check. Even if I asked for a check, how the hell could I cash it without using my real ID? They wouldn't make it out to bearer. From the start, I felt that taking it as a lump sum was foolish. In a lump sum cash payout, I would only get half of the $71 million, about $36 million, and that would be subject to mandatory tax withholding of about 1/3. The remaining $24 million was still a fortune, but how the hell could I handle a fortune? Or rather half of a fortune? I can't stand that thought. Anyway, I knew I'd make mistakes. I'd read articles and seen TV shows about how so many lottery winners piddled their winnings away or were fleeced by Sharpies and con artists. I didn't flatter myself that I had any financial expertise. I might well be a sucker for a halfway skilled con man or woman. I'd always thought that the way to handle a big win was to take it as an annuity payout. That way I'd get the full $71 million over 27 years. There was a formula, about $27,000 per million, which works out to about $1.9 million a year. Even if I went all apeshit and irresponsible and pissed everything away buying Jaguars and yachts and mansions that first year, 1 year later would come the next $1.9 million installment. Surely somewhere in there I would wise up and start acting responsibly. Then I remembered to cut the numbers in half to include Kimberly and a-hole. I guess could always hope that Kimberly and Randy would always remain apeshit and irresponsible. There were a lot of pros and cons on the lump sum versus annuity decision, but I always knew which would be best for me. There was no way I could do any fake ID hanky-panky thing for either kind of payout and get away with it. No matter what, it looked like I was screwed, and Kimberly and a-hole were going to be living large on what should be half of my winnings. In the end, it was Irene who picked up on the only possible loophole, what I had been refusing to talk about with her. Ross, she said, you have to find someone else to cash in as the winner. Someone you can trust to give the money back after all the excitement dies down. Of course I thought of that. The catch was that there was no way to make a legally enforceable agreement, like a contract. Normally that would have to involve a lawyer, and any lawyer would be duty-bound to reveal the existence of the deal once he or she learned about the divorce. What we were talking about would be a transparent subterfuge to hide the winnings from the marital property settlement. It would be illegal as hell. The lawyer would have to blow the whistle on it, that officer of the court thing. And if you made a written agreement between you and the someone else, a private contract, that agreement would always be a secret weapon for either of you if you had any later disagreement. Once again, collusion to hide the winnings from the marital property settlement. And a handshake-style oral agreement? A famous Hollywood big shot once said that oral agreements aren't worth the paper they're written on. The other person would be free to smile and walk away with my money, and I'd have no recourse. Under any agreement scenario, if I got caught, the judge might punish me by giving a bigger share to Kimberly Or maybe even all of it. What about family, Ross? She asked. Surely you must have somebody you can trust? Family? My mom and dad are dead. I have a brother, Craig, and a sister, Cora, but they are greedy, selfish people married to people who are even greedier and more selfish. I caught them trying to alter mom and dad's wills. Can I trust them? Not with a 10-cent loan. So who does that leave, Irene? I said. There are a few people like Ollie, the security guard. He and a few others are casual friends. But how strong a friend would they be with millions of dollars in their hands, and me with no legal hold over them? Well, at that point, it was a no-brainer. I took her hands and gazed into her eyes. Of course that leaves you, Irene. I have absolute trust in you. But my problem is what I told you. I can't put you at risk if something went wrong and the scheme was discovered. So I guess I'm gonna make Kimberly and A-hole very happy. I went to pick up the phone to call my faithless wife. But Irene put her hand over mine and pushed it back down to put the phone back in its charger cradle. No, Ross. I want to do it. I'll happily take my chances with the law. You deserve this break. Not that adulterous bitch and her lover. You give me that ticket and I'll hand it in as mine. And then I'll hand you back the money as soon as it's safe. And there will be no more argument about it. When I had to deal with Jared and wound up getting you rehired, I showed you that I can be stubborn and ornery. I couldn't argue her out of it. I tried. I tried every argument I had. But I eventually caved. That woman could out-stubborn me, no question. So I gave in and agreed that Irene would take my ticket and say that she bought it. She would go down to the lottery office just before the 180th day and claim the prize, requesting an annuity payout. Did we have any attacks of conscience about it? Short answer, no. Long answer, hell no. No matter what the legal niceties were, neither Irene nor I saw any justice in letting Kimberly and her lover share in my sudden good fortune. I felt that Irene did deserve to share. I wanted her to take half, but she was appalled at the idea. It was my ticket, I should get it all. But I insisted that she had to take a share for her taking the big risk for me, if for nothing else. I offered her 25% of the winnings, but she refused. She just didn't want to take anything, but I insisted. You have your mother to support, I said. She looked at me oddly, as if she were about to say something, but remained silent. I already knew that I couldn't out-stubborn her. But I could appeal to her nurturing nature. I thought, look, I said, this way you can ensure that your mother gets the best possible care. I insist. Either we give you a decent share, or to hell with our deal and Kimberly will get half. That clinched it. Neither of us was going to accept that. So Irene grudgingly consented to a 15-85 split. Her 15% as a fee for doing me this big favor would be about a measly $250,000 a year. She allowed as how she might be able to struggle along on that. As I said, Irene went along with it, but not without having a mysterious glint in her eye for days afterwards. I didn't know what it meant, but hell, I trusted her, didn't I? We had a lot of time to kill before she would go get the winnings. She resumed those happy days of coming over to my house almost every night, and I made sure that I didn't get into any moods that would require her comforting. We'd never talked about what happened on that one night, as she had asked in her note. I understood that evening was not to be mentioned. There were no dark moods. Just having her around kept me upbeat. Sometimes in the middle of an innocuous conversation, we'd look at each other and we'd just start to giggle like school kids passing a secret note. Over the next 6 months, we had a great time, both at work and outside of it. Being able to see ahead to a life with no money worries has a great effect on your outlook on life. Irene loved to hear me ramble on about my theories on how to handle the money. She critiqued my plans for what to do after she claimed the winnings, and how to move the money around to avoid scrutiny. She looked for gaps and mistakes. She had questions enough to make me think we needed to get professionals involved. I went to the lawyer that I had retained for the divorce, Mr. Henry Aldrich, ESQ, a courtly old-school gentleman in his 60s. He came as a referral from the Uni-G Legal Counsel Benefit Program. He was part of a large group practice, and I asked him if they handled legal aspects of investments. He nodded. I told him I had a friend coming into a money windfall, a big one, and asked his advice. He said that much depended on the size of the money to be handled. I told him over $1 million a year. He unbent enough to whistle. Well, he said, at the very least, your friend needs a team of advisors. He or she should have a lawyer to protect his legal interests, an accountant to help him handle the disposition of money, and a tax advisor to ensure that whatever decisions he made did not have adverse tax implications. But most importantly, he said, my friend would need a financial advisor to help him or her invest and manage the money. Each of the 4 professionals would counsel from his or her own area of expertise, and they might sometimes be at cross purposes. Thus, it would be up to me, That is, to my friend to sort out the middle ground. The group practice that I am with encompasses all of that expertise, he said. But you? Your friend can pick whomever he or she wanted. Any professional worth his or her salt should be able to work with any other professional, he said. If they say they can't, or try to steer you to their own recommended choices, I'd say, walk away. Of course you could look on me as doing the same, but at least I've told you your options. I quickly thanked him, so as to get off the clock. I'd have Irene come see him and his group before she went in to make the claim. She'd insist on recording their counseling sessions so that I would understand what advice she was getting. Now we had to kill the rest of the time waiting for the lottery payout and my divorce. The EPUB work kept me active, but not really busy. Irene and I could do most of it on autopilot. I had a lot of nervous energy and a need to be doing something more than the merely routine. So I revived my EPUB online self-publishing plan. I priced out the cost savings and the budget and put the whole thing down on paper. Irene was as strongly invested in the plan as I. She had done a lot of the research, calling around for price information and the like. Again, trying to be fair and above board, I made my pitch for it to Jared, and again he shot it down with zero interest. He scribbled his rejection on the front page of the package, with a Sharpie, for emphasis. That was expected, but it still pissed me off. I brooded over it, with Irene as co-brooder, and pondered the next step. Perhaps it was time to consider going out of UniG and trying to sell the service as a small business. Of course, it didn't take all that much courage, considering we were just under 6 months away from being rich. The big hurdle was whether we could legally do it. Were we constrained by any commitments to UniG? And if not, what kind of a business should it be? A partnership? A corporation? I had done enough research to know that I didn't know enough about it to proceed. I also knew that I didn't know what else I didn't know. We would need professional guidance. I called for an appointment to see lawyer Aldrich again, and we talked briefly on the phone. I explained that it was a new, unrelated topic. I described the essence of the online publishing proposal and what Irene and I wanted to do. I also explained my concerns about whether we could legally market it outside of UniG. I had to ask whether he had ties to UniG that would preclude him advising us. What I meant was that I came to him through UniG's legal assistance program. He said the referral system was hands-off. He and his firm had no ties to UniG in any way. On the topic of my call, lawyer Aldrich asked me a few questions and told me to send him some documents so he could evaluate the proposition. Here was my problem. See, management and professional level UniG employees have to sign a document called an employment agreement, or EA. That's what Jared was briefing me about when I got terminated. It bans moonlighting for a competitor, sharing company-sensitive or proprietary information with a competitor, and sharing or using that kind of information if you leave UniG and go to work for a competitor. The section that troubled me was their insistence that any invention or other creative product that you come up with while at UniG belonged to UniG, unless you could prove that you did it completely on your own time, and there was no UniG activity or knowledge or experience involved in it. In this case, it was obvious that my experience with the current EPUB support procedures had schooled me on the problems that the online publishing proposal was designed to solve. The way I read it, I was unable to market it outside of UniG. The way the EA read, UniG owned the essence of my proposal. Lawyer Aldrich sounded unconcerned. He said he wanted to see copies of our EA's, Irene's and mine, and the sections of UniG's policies and procedures that dealt with employment, hiring, firing, and the purpose of the EAs. I sent him copies of the EAs copied directly from the ones in our personnel files. We had the right to do that, as long as we didn't make them public or send them to competitors. I also sent him a printout of the pertinent P&P sections. That was not my right. In fact, it was a clear violation of UniG's policies. Probably prosecutable. Heck, I was becoming an unrepentant malefactor and damned proud of it. Who could have foreseen my descent into crime? I was plotting to hide marital assets from my adulterous wife, and now I was violating UniG's proprietary policies. What was next? Tearing tags off mattresses? Spitting on the sidewalk? Standing on the left side of escalators? When we had the meeting, lawyer Aldrich seemed to be in a good mood as he shook hands with us and we sat down at his conference table. The reason for his good spirits was quickly told, and my qualms about printing out proprietary information were brushed aside. Strictly speaking, he explained, while we had no right to print out the UniG policies and procedures for most external uses, this was a special case. As our lawyer, he needed to see the facts governing the case to prepare for his representation. He said if it came to court, and if UniG were to cite the P&P against me, then they would be compelled to make a copy available to him to support anything that they might assert from it. And then he would need a postponement to study it. This way we were saving time and being proactive. As for the EA documents themselves, Lawyer Aldrich noted that what Irene had in her personnel file was an unsigned blank version. Apparently, she had slipped from secretary to managerial status so quickly that no one had gotten around to making her sign the document. It just sat there in her personnel file and had no legal validity at all, per our lawyer. Before that, when she was a mere secretary, she didn't rate an EA. You can do anything you like, Miss Ellison. UniG has no legal hold on you, he told her. Then he turned his attention to mine. It was signed, all legal and proper-like. It was designed to protect UniG from me going off and competing with them. I also owed them first crack at any inventions or innovations that I came up with while in their employment, which should cover the proposal, per the EA. It looked like I was screwed. No, that we were screwed. Irene and her mom were part of the deal now. I didn't even know her mother, but if she was Irene's responsibility, she was mine too. Lawyer Aldrich disagreed. He said that looks were deceiving. Looks didn't mean that it was ironclad. People have sued and gotten out from under these agreements, he explained. The courts do not look well upon agreements like this. They are seen as attempts to coerce people into signing away their constitutionally protected rights. The preponderance of the rulings say that they are unenforceable. The First Amendment right of free speech and other constitutional rights cannot be so cavalierly signed away under coercion, he said. We could always go that route. Then he turned my EA around and pointed to the signature and date, March 16, 01. He asked when I was fired and then rehired. I told him fired August 23, 2007, and rehired August 24, 2007. He asked me to detail for him the routine that I followed to check out on the 23rd. Well, Jared had a checkout list, and as each thing was done, he checked it off. He took my keys, my ID badge, and my corporate American Express card. He gave me 15 minutes to copy any personal files off my laptop, and then he took the laptop. He read from a blurb about how I was bound by the EA while I was gone from UniG. He gave me my termination check. Then he had me escorted to my desk to pick up my personal stuff, and then out of the building. Aldrich chuckled. Wonderful. I expect that at some point they'll try to argue that you never stopped being an employee, but that little routine puts the lie to that, he said. How was the blurb worded? Did it actually state that you were bound by the EA while you were gone from UniG? I didn't understand why that was important, but I rooted through my folder and found my copy of the blurb and passed it to him. I took out all of the documents and spread them out on the table. He scanned it and smiled. It beat the hell out of me what he found so entertaining in all this. Smiles? Chuckles? Damned if I saw anything funny in it. What it says is the EA covers you while you were an employee of UniG, and while you are no longer an employee, he explained. Note that it says nothing about what the EA's status is if you were hired back. So we have to speculate about your status then. Because they did hire you back, Ross. Now, this may get a little tricky. The PNP clearly states that when someone is hired, a determination has to be made based on the employee's job title, whether the new hire has to sign an EA. You came back as a secretary, so you weren't handed an EA to sign. I note here that among your paperwork is a finding sheet dated August 24, 08 that says your secretary job title is such that you do not merit an EA. It's boilerplate, but there it is and it's signed by the director of HR. Now the tricky part is this. If you were a managerial hire or a professional, the PNP says that you must sign an EA as a condition of employment. If there was any sense that an earlier EA might still be in force, good legal practice requires that it should so state and state that the EA is not required in such a case. In legal practice, anything that is not specifically stated can represent a significant gap or omission. Sound law is written to expressly include everything possible because anything not included is arguably not covered. I listened to his explanation. I said it sounded like George Orwell's 1984 speak. Everything not permitted is forbidden. He nodded. The corollary would be, everything not forbidden is permitted. This is circumstantial, Mr. Camden, but making decisions out of circumstantial material is the very residential of the law. I'm sure I looked blank. Aldrich chuckled. You'll have to forgive me, Mr. Camden. I'm an old-fashioned lawyer who loves to sprinkle in his Latin phrases once in a while. Res is legal speak for the matter, or core, or substance of something. I see the residential thusly. Once you were rehired, the original EA was no longer valid. It was null and void and all those other fine legal negatives. If you had been hired back as a professional or manager, they would have insisted that you sign an EA as a condition of employment because they had no reason to believe that you were still covered by the old one. The PNP does not make any provision for that. They did not in your case because you weren't hired back as a manager. In my opinion, you had no EA as soon as you walked in the door. So whatever money-making scheme you come up with is your intellectual property and not UniG's. They wrote the rules, and they were careless. That's a bad policy that they have there. Anyway, Lawyer Aldrich sniffed. If they're going to insist on the fiction of an EA, every employee should be made to sign one, not just the managers and professionals. They act as if no one else can have an idea. In my experience with corporations, the executive offices and managers' meetings are the last places you'd look for an original idea. Irene and I looked at each other, realizing that we had a green light for our proposal, which brought me full circle back to my original reason for wanting legal advice. The reason why I wanted to be certain that I was not bound to that damned EA. I laid out my plan for online publication of the engineering publications to Lawyer Aldrich. I explained how I had pitched it to Jared and he had rejected it. At that point, Lawyer Aldrich chuckled again. I was getting to like the sound of it. He asked, did he annotate the proposal in any way? Yep, he wrote no way. Jared Vaughn on the top. Do you have the annotated document? I leafed through the documents, found it, and handed it over. He focused on the scribbled note on the front. At last, he said, Mr. Camden, with what you've shown me I could argue your case at least 3 ways, and I think we would win all 3. This note is the simplest route. Even if EAs were enforceable, which I've explained that they are not, and you were bound by that EA, which I've explained that you are not, Jared's rejection would still make you free to do with it what you want. UniG management has seen it and has rejected it in writing in the person of Jared Vaughn. He leaned back, pleased with himself. Then he asked what our next step was. I told him I meant to send it to UniG as an outside unsolicited proposal. If we won, we would quit UniG and run their EPUB service as an outside vendor. We would also market it to other companies with similar EPUB functions, as long as they were not UniG competitors. He nodded, and then said, Mr. Camden, lawyers are notorious skeptics. Almost always when people come to a lawyer like me with a plan or a scheme, the safest thing to do is tell them not to do it. That way, if they do go ahead and run into trouble, they can't come back and blame the attorney for bad advice. And if they go ahead and wind up a millionaire, nobody cares what their lawyer said way back when. I've done my share of that. But in this case, I'll go contrarian. I can't think of any impediment to you 2 people making a go of this. You're both smart people who understand this EPUB business very well. And if I may say so, Ross and Irene, most of my clients come in with fairly mundane situations. It's all new and nerve-wracking for them, but I've seen just about every variation of it 100 times. What you're trying to do is different and interesting. I'd be very pleased if you let me represent you in the furtherance of your plans. He suggested that we should set up a corporation and referred us to another lawyer in his group who would walk us through the process of incorporation. So we had a free hand, but we waited until the day we were fully and officially incorporated as L&M Solutions. Then we took the plan that I'd pitched to Jared and formalized it as an unsolicited proposal from L&M Solutions. We FedExed it to Jared's boss, H.J. Baldridge, the VP for Corporate Support Services. We had updated the numbers and fine-tuned the proposal as a PowerPoint presentation. Now, in light of later events, I have to stress that I updated the numbers. The numbers were mine. 3 days later, we got a response. His secretary called my contact number, which was my cell phone, and asked if we could be available to discuss our proposal at our earliest convenience. The current time was 10:20. I said, how about this morning? She was surprised, but put me on hold for a few minutes. When she came back, she asked if 11:30 in their main conference room was acceptable. I said sure. Since she had no idea we were right in the same building, she asked if we needed directions to UniG. I said no, that L&M was good with that. I had said nothing in the cover letter to indicate that we were UniG employees. I told Irene that we were on. We were both pretty jazzed up, but went ahead and wrapped up what we had on our desks. At 11:15, we went online to the company time report website and clocked out. We would be pitching on our own time, not UniG's. We gathered our materials and our nerves and I went to the bathroom one last time or 3. Were we worried? A little. At least I was. Irene simply put her arms around me for a bodacious hug and said that she knew I could carry it off. Our hug drew some interested looks and smiles from the people on the production floor who saw us. I didn't care, and apparently neither did Irene. We walked into the reception area from the back hallway at 11:25 and saw Mr. Baldridge's secretary Olivia Hamill waiting there, expecting to have to escort us. When we introduced ourselves and she saw our green UniG ID badges, she shook her head and dryly said that her boss would be surprised, and that she hoped that we knew what we were doing. So did I. She led us back to a conference room. When he came in, Mr. Baldridge seemed momentarily nonplussed when he saw the ID badges, but greeted us amiably enough as we came in. For some reason, I got the notion that he looked vaguely familiar. Mr. Baldridge insisted on a first-name basis, and so he was Harlan, and we were Ross and Irene. We all turned off our cell phones to prevent interruptions. The name Harlan tugged at my forjetter, the part of my mind that was in charge of forgetting things. We explained that we were acting as representatives of L&M Solutions, and not as UniG employees. Harlan had been eyeing our badges from the moment he walked in the door, and he blinked at that statement. "I'm not sure how that's going to work," he noted. "We have EAs that preclude that." I assured him that we were on firm legal ground. He cocked his head and said that he wasn't convinced of that, but would defer judgment until he heard a bit more about our proposal. He asked us for a few minutes and whispered a few words to Olivia, who left the room. We were soon joined by several of his support staff, who also reacted to our badges as they caught sight of them. He introduced 2 of the 4. In the prevailing collegial mode, they were Randy and Arlene and were accountants. Number crunchers, in other words. The other 2 sat unintroduced and wordless at the far end of the table. We hooked up my brand new laptop to the projector and kicked off our presentation. The first bullet in our presentation was that if we won a contract, our own position costs, that is, our salaries and benefits, would go away. In other words, if we won the proposed contract, Irene and I would resign. The other bullets? Setup costs. Getting the material ready to print in either the current system or ours had no significant difference in cost. All the text and graphics were in computer file formats, no matter how they were to be reproduced. There might have to be some conversion to other software formats, but I assumed that was fairly simple and straightforward. We had a modest sum for startup costs for the changes to the UniG tech support website to put the ordering system online. I would go to every client site to show them how to use our website to order their EPUB. We had a video for each location that showed the steps, and I would demo it. Printing costs. These made the greatest difference. The press runs required to bring down the cost per document meant that UniG wound up with shelves full of manuals, and such that we hoped would not be rendered obsolete by the next email from production or tech support. UniG wasted a lot of money when we had to toss in used product when the documents had to be changed. The changeable nature of EPUB was made for the normal kind of pod where the cost per document was the same for 1 unit or 5,000. My experience with the mean time to obsolescence rates of the various kinds of publications told me when I could get away with a moderate press run, which we would need for some publications. See, there would still be some clients who would need us to supply them with their copies. Lack of adequate printing systems was one reason. Resistance to change was another. We couldn't force our paying customers to do things they were uncomfortable with. Storage costs. In the current system, we had about 1,300 square feet of storage space, which was charged against EPUB as an indirect cost, as was about 200 square feet for our office space, desks, files, and tables for order processing. In the online printing method, there are no storage costs for printed EPUB. In most cases, the clients would print out their EPUB on demand at their own site. We'd order the binders and the first year's paper stock and have them shipped to the client sites. We didn't store it ourselves. But what about the so-called legacy documents, the ones that we still had to maintain because they covered old copies that we had to keep on hand for client with older equipment? And there were the copies we still had to order in the standard pod manner for the tech-shy clients. I'll cover that later in the presentation. Another plus was that EPUB storage and office space was currently down on the production floor, space that was needed by production. They were currently renting Quonset huts as temporary working space. Freeing up the EPUB storage area and office spaces would give production a free, additional 1,500 square feet. If we won the contract, all we would need as vendors were a couple of desks with phones and laptop connections to the UniG website. But that could be anywhere in the UniG spaces. There was a whole row of temporary office spaces for use by visitors and vendors at the admin end of the building. Most of them were empty on most days. L&M Solutions could use 2 of those, just like any other vendor. UniG provided them as a courtesy and did not charge for their use. We were 2 vendors, needing 2 offices. There would be ample space in the 2 offices to store the legacy and pod EPUB. The former would eventually go away. We would work with the clients to lead them toward the pod in their own offices model, which would reduce the latter. Our overall price for providing the service as an outside vendor would be lower than the existing real cost of EPUB services. And that was after we had budgeted it with a fat profit margin for ourselves to partially make up for our lost wages and benefits. But despite that, the cost to UniG for the first year's worth of EPUB support would be 6.5% lower than the current projected cost of operations that included us as UniG employees. And that first year's cost included all the upfront costs of giving all of our clients the binders and a year's worth of the heavy paper stock. After that startup year, the clients would have to buy their own paper. Once those initial costs have been incurred in year 1, we estimated that subsequent yearly cost savings would improve somewhere between 18 to 25% over the current levels, or under them, if one wanted to be literal. Harlan was impressed. We gave him the details of our costing model, and he asked Randy and Arlene to vet our cost estimates. They took the disc and said they'd be back in no more than an hour. Then Harlan reminded us that we had another little unresolved problem. He introduced the other two staffers, Roger Clavin and Clifford Finch, Uni-G corporate lawyers. So much for that first-name collegiality. Apparently it didn't extend to lawyers. They moved down to our end, and he turned them loose on us, or rather on me. The topic was the legality of two Uni-G employees operating as an outside firm and offering to provide the same service to Uni-G that they were currently providing as employees. Conflict of interest, violation of contractual obligations, and theft of proprietary information were among the topics of interest. For openers, wow, I knew I was in for a very thorough Q&A, and all through it I kept thinking, thank you Henry Aldrich, Esquire. Was I familiar with the Uni-G employment agreement, also known as the EA? Yes, I was. Was I aware that my EA forbade me to moonlight for other companies, including my own? I'm aware that it said that, I said. But I now know that EAs are intended to be intimidating documents, but that they have not withstood legal challenges in a number of recent court cases. I pulled out 2 copies of a printed list of citations provided by lawyer Aldrich and handed them over. Roger Clavin would be a decent poker player, I thought. His expression did not change one iota. Clifford Finch's eyes widened as he scanned the list. Lawyer Clavin sniffed and tossed the list back on the table. Some of these are under appeal. Some have been confirmed on appeal for very narrow instances. However, none of them are applicable to this situation. Well, if it ever came to a court battle, we would have to see what the judge and jury thought, wouldn't we? I said brightly. I shot a glance at Irene, who was watching with a small smile on her face, and Harlan Baldridge, who was poker-faced. Damn, he looked familiar. However, I continued, it would probably never come to that, because neither Miss Ellison nor I have a signed binding EA to begin with. Lawyer Finch smiled a humorless smile and pulled a pair of documents out of a folder and tossed them down in front of me. It was very much a voila moment for him. I turned Irene's around so that it was right side up from where they sat. Would you show me where Miss Ellison signed this? That signature line looks pretty darn blank to me. Lawyer Clavin retained his poker face, but Lawyer Finch's face reddened as he looked at the empty signature line. See, it's dated August 23, 07, but she never signed it. I pointed out helpfully. That was the day that she got promoted to the EPUB manager's job, but somebody dropped the ball. Probably Jared Vaughn would be my guess, since he was her immediate superior, but I guess this is the wrong time to be pointing fingers and playing the blame game, right? But what I said is true, at least for her. She does not have a signed binding EA. Do you disagree? And if you do, on what basis? Lawyer Clavin leaned forward. It is company policy that every incoming or promoted professional or manager has to have a signed EA as a condition of employment, he said. He was sitting catty-corner from me, so I leaned forward too, putting my face about 18 inches from his. Yep, but regardless of the policy, Irene doesn't have one. So, either she is not bound because she doesn't have one, or she is not an Uni-G employee because she hasn't met a condition of employment. Either way, what I said is true. Now, Uni-G has continued to treat her as an employee. They've paid her salary and provided all the benefits, like health insurance and 401k matching contributions and the alike. And she has worked her job and filled out her time reports as an employee, and Jared has approved them. So despite what the P&P says about the condition of employment, there she is. And she is not bound by any EA. I snuck another look at Irene, who was grinning. I checked Harlan and was surprised. He looked amused. I have had little exposure to bigwigs and have no idea what makes them tick. I began to have a sneaking suspicion that Harlan might have a sense of humor, even about business matters. And that completed some mental connections. I realized now where I knew him from, but I set that aside for the moment. The rest of the interrogation got a bit more complicated. It dealt with me, and the reasons why I insisted that I did not have a valid binding EA despite my signed EA, dated March 16, 01, that sat on the table in front of me. I ran them through Lawyer Aldrich's arguments, and it wound up with them arguing that despite what the P&P says, that I did too have to be bound by the old one even though their P&P says I had to sign a new one when I was hired back as a professional or manager. When I reminded them that I was hired back as a secretary, with no requirement to sign an EA, they clung to the argument that the original EA was still in force. I went back to what the P&P said. In the blurb, if I had been hired back as a manager, the P&P says I would have had to sign an EA. Note that it doesn't make an exception for the event where I might have already had an EA in place. Now why is that? I asked. Reluctantly, Lawyer Clavin said that such a situation had not been contemplated when the P&P was written. But the P&P sections are checked out and approved by corporate lawyers, aren't they? I asked. I guess that was a rhetorical question, because they did not answer. But we all knew that it was so. I pointed out that one purpose of the EA was to prevent an employee from using their knowledge of proprietary matter to benefit another company. But I didn't go to another company. I went back to UniG. But did the EA hang over me forever? Or was there a point when the EA no longer applied? I was armed with citations, case law that set limits to the life of an EA. In one case, it could no longer restrict a former employee after 5 years. The ruling was that the proprietary information was outdated by then. In another ruling, by similar logic, the EA was held invalid after 3 years. The important point was that the EA was not perpetual. It did have limits. Lawyer Aldrich's contention was when a former employee returned, the old EA was terminated, because the P&P made no accounting for it. All the P&P said was that when someone was hired, their job title had to be evaluated to determine whether an EA should be made a condition of employment. If a professional or manager, yes. If not, no. In my case, if the EA were still in effect after I went back to UniG, then the P&P should have had words to that effect. I was arguing the way Lawyer Aldrich coached me. In legal documents, nothing can be assumed. If the P&P did not include the possibility that I might already have a valid EA, it meant that I could not have one. That could only mean that my original EA was moot as soon as I was rehired. Aldrich had pounded into me that the law looked at things in black and white. If one wanted to state a position, one had to state all of the possibilities and exclusions. Anything left out of the exclusions was, in effect, a possibility that had to be addressed. It was a loophole. Anything not permitted is forbidden. Anything not forbidden is permitted. They insisted that my position was wrong and easily proven in court. I shrugged and said they were welcome to try that in court if it came to that. I pulled out another piece of paper from my personnel file. It was a boilerplate statement by the Director of Human Resources dated August 24, 2008. It certified that Ross Stephen Camden had been offered and had accepted an offer of employment as a secretary. More to the point, it stated that Mr. Camden's position was deemed to be neither professional nor managerial, and therefore no employee agreement is required as a condition of employment. They stood their ground. We were at an impasse. I looked over to Harlan Baldridge to see how he was taking all this. As I expected, he seemed to be enjoying the dispute. We were interrupted at that point by the return of Randy and Arlene, Harlan's number crunchers. Harlan stepped aside with them and got briefed. Then he called his secretary Olivia over and whispered something in her ear. She nodded and left the room. Then he gave Randy and Arlene the floor. They said that we were conservative in our estimates of the first year and subsequent year savings. Where we had estimated first-year cost savings of 6.5%, their analysis came up with 7.4%. Where we had seen the subsequent year cost savings as being in the 18 to 25% range under a range of certain assumptions, they came up with 21 to 26%. Harlan thanked them and took their printouts for his perusal. They handed me our disc and left, and it was now just Irene and me, Harlan, and the 2 lawyers. Harlan said that he wanted to put the EA dispute on hold for the nonce, although he stated that the only thing still in dispute was my status. He said it was clear that Miss Ellison had never been bound by any EA. The lawyers weren't happy with that, but they sat back quietly. He buzzed out at that point and Olivia came back into the room, followed by a visibly angry Jared Vaughn. Spotting me and apparently forgetting where he was, Jared ignored everyone else and rounded on me. I've been calling you on your extension and your cell for the past 30 minutes. Where the hell have you been? Right here, Jared. I've been explaining my proposal for online publishing on demand. Jared looked around and belatedly remembered his manners. He started to apologize to Mr. Baldridge for having his time wasted. I explained to Camden that his scheme was completely impractical. He should be reprimanded for bypassing me and going over my head. I mock-dope smacked my head. Oh yes, geez. I'm sorry I forgot to mention that, Harlan. I was having so much playing like I was a lawyer about the EA thing, I said. The whole EA argument might be moot. Even if UniG might have had first dibs on my plan, UniG management, in the person of Jared Vaughn, said they had no interest in it. I think that means I can do what I want with it. From my array of documents, I took out the proposal with Jared's rejection scribbled on the front cover. Harlan looked at it, and then at Jared. Vaughn, why am I not surprised that you rejected this so summarily? This is a good proposal, as in good for UniG. The numbers make sense for us. The way I read it, the service these folks are offering is going to save us a considerable amount of money. Would you mind explaining why you didn't pass it up the chain to me? Or more to the point, did you even read it? I looked at Irene. She had caught Harlan's, is going to save us too. It sure sounded as if he'd already made a decision. Obviously, Jared had not picked up on that. Well, it's, Mr. Baldridge, it's just a harebrained scheme, Jared sputtered. We score high on client satisfaction the way we do things now. Why would we change that? I rolled my eyes. I was tempted to ask him to describe the way we do things now, but figured that would be too cruel, even for such a deserving a-hole. Harlan said, "You've obviously not read the proposal, and if you did, you didn't understand the numbers, Vaughn." Jared got stubborn and angry. He said the numbers were bogus, because we could not act as independent entities. If Harlan liked the plan, fine, but it would be implemented by us as his employees because we were bound by our employment agreements. Okay, yes, he had rejected it, but that didn't change our EA obligations. The lawyers broke in and said they wanted to revisit the EA argument at that point. I said I needed a break, and Irene and I walked out to the corridor. We left behind an angry Jared Vaughn, two lawyers engaged in last-ditch denial, and a surprisingly quiet Harlan Baldridge. When we got outside and closed the door, Irene put her hands on my shoulders, leaned over, and kissed me firmly on the lips. "You're knocking them dead, killer," she said. When we were leaving, I got a look from Harlan's secretary, Olivia. She smiled and gave us a thumbs up. When we returned, the lawyers were sticking to their guns and Jared was sullen. The lawyers' last-ditch denial argument, summed up, was that they were confident that EAs were legal and enforceable, and they were confident that my EA was still in force. And they were very confident in their confidence. Since I had developed our plan from detailed knowledge of UniG proprietary information, if I tried to market it to other firms, UniG would defend their rights in court. Harlan looked at me. I looked at Irene and shrugged. "Well, our lawyer disagrees," I said. "And so do we. The current situation is messy. If we're going to have to defend ourselves and have to drag this through the courts the way things stand right now, we can't do our jobs. So, Irene and I hereby withdraw our proposal. We also hereby tender our resignations, effective immediately. We will market the online support plan to UniG's competitors. With regard to all the EA stuff, feel free to sue us, and we'll defend the suit." I pulled Irene's chair back, and we stood up to leave. We actually made it halfway to the door. Harlan Baldridge said, "Just a minute. Ross, Irene, would you please come back and sit down? Please. We need to talk this out. There will be no lawsuits." The lawyers protested, but Jared completely lost it. He erupted. He jumped up and overshouted Harlan's voice with probably the stupidest complaint he could have possibly come up with. "Goddamn you, Camden. You can't just quit. You can't leave without giving 14 days notice. That's a business courtesy, not a legal requirement, Jared," I said. "I'm normally all for courtesy, but frankly, neither Miss Ellison nor I can stomach the idea of working for you for 14 more hours, much less 14 more days." Jared stood, visibly fuming, looking around for allies and support. Finding none, he abruptly sat back down. Harlan took over. "All right, Ross, let's forget about withdrawing the proposal. It's in your best interest and mine that we accept it as is. I absolutely do not want this to go to our competition." Then he turned to Jared. "Vaughn, EPUB is your responsibility. I want you to walk this proposal over to the front office to get the ball rolling on implementing it. As of now, Ross and Irene will report directly to me until the contract is signed and in force. Then I'll accept their resignations with regret." "No," Jared snapped. "What?" Jared stood up. His face darkened with anger. "I said no. This is a stupid plan. They'll screw it up and the clients will scream and I'll be the fall guy because they supposedly work for me. They're just trying to undercut me and take out my most important function. Christ, if you put EPUB support online, I won't have anything remotely resembling a department. Well, I'm not sticking around for this crap. I'm out of here. I'll email you my formal resignation." I couldn't resist. "Gee, Jared, not even a 14-day notice?" For just one brief moment I thought he was going to come at me, and I was on my feet waiting for him. "Please, please, please, Jared, please take a swing at me." But the moment passed. He glared, but he didn't offer. He stalked out of the meeting room glaring back at me. I think that I had never realized before that moment just how much that a-hole hated me, but not so much that he was willing to do anything about it. Rats. I thought. "Well, I guess I have to advertise for a new director," Harlan said. Then he looked at me. "How would you feel about a promotion, Ross?" I laughed. "I appreciate your confidence. I truly do. But now that you've okayed our proposal, we'd rather dedicate ourselves to get it up and running as vendors. But Harley, look, you really don't need a replacement for Jared. Take away EPUB, and all that is left to manage are some small miscellaneous programs. They can all slide over into other departments, and you can add Jared's personnel costs to the savings under our proposal. A win-win proposition." Harlan laughed. You're ahead of me there, Ross, but not by much. He paused for a few seconds. You know, I haven't answered to Harley in quite a while. I think you deserve to know this much. Vaughn is married to Uni G. President Curry's daughter. That got him plopped into the director's job 2 years ago. It was nepotism, caused by John Curry's fondness for his younger daughter, his princess. He wanted to be certain that she was taken care of, and knew Vaughn wasn't much. Curry tried to insulate him from comeback for some pretty poor decisions, just plain bad management skills. His department was put together as it was precisely because all of his managers could run it despite his management abilities, or lack thereof. But that's all over with. Just this past week, President Curry told me the gloves were off. It seems that Marjorie Curry Vaughn has some growing suspicions that Jared has been playing around on her. Oh, nothing concrete so far, but there are investigators working on it. I've been looking for an excuse to smack him down, and your proposal dropped into my lap. Ross, you're a valuable asset. Are you sure you won't stay? I have some responsibilities in mind that are greater than Jared Jennings' piddly little department. I was tempted. It's a very heady thing to learn that higher management thinks highly of you. Then I looked at Irene, and she smiled as she shook her head. I raised one eyebrow, and she gave the little shake again. She was the boss. I said, Harley, I appreciate the offer, I really do. But I'm at a changing point in my life, both personally and professionally. I think I'd prefer to manage EPUB for you as a vendor and be free to do other things. Harlan Baldridge shook his head. I didn't think you'd bite. Somehow, I don't think you'd be happy climbing the corporate ladder. Now I made that choice. I got a trainer, worked off the flab, and tooled myself to look and dress like a corporate man. He glanced at Irene and back at me. It was for a woman. I fell in love with Priscilla Curry, John's older daughter. Sad to say, Jared is my brother-in-law, but I suspect not for too long. Anyway, that's my story, and you two are setting out on yours. Best of luck to you, Ross, and to you too, Ms. Ellison. All this has really made for an entertaining and productive day. He shook my hand in Irene's and left. We were now free to market the service to competitors and other industries. We turned in our resignations, giving 2 weeks' notice, which was not just a courtesy. We needed a bridge to ensure that the EPUB orders still got fulfilled under the old arrangement until our vendor operation got up and running. Our business model was all on paper. It would take us some time, possibly more than 2 weeks before we could have the pod contracts in hand, the binders and paper supplies ordered and sent off to all the clients, and the website upgraded for online printing orders. We couldn't start billing until we're separated and gone as employees. And truthfully, we still needed our paychecks. It would take at least a month or two before our L&M enterprise invoices would get processed and turned into checks. Ironically, on that first day of the 2-week countdown, there weren't too many things to be done. And once we got the last of the orders in the afternoon FedEx pickup box, we left. Outside, it felt so strange to be standing in the big parking lot while everyone else was inside, still all geared up and working. We had skipped lunch to be able to get done and get out. I had plans to do some after-hours work to get the pod plan ramped up, but I felt that some kind of celebration was in order. This was a big day for us. Irene, will you let me buy you a late lunch? I asked. She considered it for a few seconds, and then said, No, I think I'm going to take you home and feed you lunch there. Her home? Irene's home? I had never been there. Whoa, Irene was going to take me to her home? I'd never even seen the place. Like the old charts had it, this was Terra Incognita. Terra Incognita was a double-wide trailer set up permanently on a small lot. There was a neat lawn and plantings of flowers and small shrubs, all well-tended. Out behind the house was a small fenced yard. I noted a play cube, the kind with a little treehouse-type structure and a slide and swings. I was about to enter the sanctum sanctorum and meet Irene's mom. She was a tiny woman, fragile as spun silk. Her name was Daisy Ellison, and she got around on a small powered wheelchair. Looking around, I could see that the trailer had been converted to be wheelchair accessible. All the work surfaces and the stovetop were lower than normal, and most of the cabinets were no higher than my eye level. Daisy's wheelchair was parked next to a couch, on which sat my next surprise. A young girl playing some kind of children's board game with Daisy. I had minimal experience with young children, so I had no idea how old she was. Around 7 or 8, I'd say if forced to guess. Daisy didn't seem inclined to want to talk, seemingly content to watch me. That made me a tad bit uncomfortable, her unswerving gaze. So, I gave all my attention to the child. She was a real natural kid. There was none of this cutesy-poo, are you going to be my new daddy stuff. She wasn't that impressed with me, that was for sure. I didn't feel that comfortable around kids. I have read that they hate to be talked down to, so I decided to talk to her as if she were a very short adult. She condescended to tell me all about her school and how she wanted to get a puppy, but Mommy and Grandma Daisy said they needed more space than was in their house. Her name was Elizabeth, but she liked to be called Liz. Daisy just sat and watched me with an enigmatic little smile on her face. Very disconcerting. Irene had been busy getting food going and in the microwave. Now she came out and formally introduced me as her friend Ross. When I was introduced to Liz, she shook my hand and then did a double take at my name. Her face went from happy to meet me to grim, an odd expression on such a young face. It was no longer that she wasn't impressed with me. She now seemed angry with me. She stood in front of me, hands on hips, and challenged me. "Are you the Ross who made my mommy cry?" I must have looked blank, because she said, "One morning my mommy came home crying, and I heard her and Grandma Daisy saying it was because of Ross." "Are you that Ross? I know you spend a lot of time with mommy. Why did you make her unhappy and make her cry?" I had no idea what to say. The only time I could ever think of that Irene might have come crying after being with me was, "Oh my God." Irene intervened and said that I was the only Ross that she knew. Then she said that I had never, ever made her so unhappy that she cried. As she said that, she was looking directly at me with her own enigmatic little smile. It must run in the family, I thought. But then I looked at Daisy, and damned if she didn't have a genuine smile, big and broad, and there was nothing enigmatic about it. And I had little doubt that we were on the same page about what we were talking about. I knew damned well it would have been smart to keep my big mouth shut, but I had to say something. I told Liz and Daisy that I never wanted to make Irene unhappy enough to cry. That if I had my way, she would always be happy. I said, there was one time when I was very unhappy myself when she visited me, and when she tried to cheer me up, things happened that neither one of us expected. So I may have made her a little bit unhappy then, although I never meant to do that. Then Irene said, "Liz, honey, there were some tears of sadness because my wonderful friend Ross had been beaten down so badly by his nasty wife. But they were also tears of joy because I was able to comfort him and make some of the pain go away. You know about tears of joy, remember?" Well, little Elizabeth wasn't satisfied with that. She said that she still didn't think she liked me for making her mommy sad. "Oh no, sweetie," Irene said. "It wasn't all Ross's fault. I was a big part of doing what we did. I wanted it so very much. But afterwards, I was afraid that I might have hurt the good friendship between us. That's why I was crying. But Ross has shown me that he is still my good friend. Maybe my best friend of all, next to you and Grandma. And I hope we will be even better friends from now on. We are very happy to be working together. We do very well together." Irene's explanation seemed to reassure Elizabeth that I was a friend, instead of a mommy troubler. She prattled on about her toys and her day. Then she asked, "Are you a hero, like my daddy was?" "I don't remember him much, but he saved a lot of people's lives when he died and went to heaven." I looked at Irene, but she shook her head and I swallowed my questions and dropped it. Elizabeth asked if I had been a soldier like her daddy. She asked me a few more questions but got used to me quickly and got bored. To tell the truth, I'm afraid I was kind of boring. I carried on that conversation with only half of my attention because some of Irene's words were rocketing around inside my brain. Something about how Irene had wanted it so very much. Irene was watching me carefully, and when she saw me start to come out with something, she darted me a strong look and shook me off. So I cooled it. Liz got bored by the adult conversation and asked to be excused to go outside and play in her play cube. She told Daisy she would finish their game later. It seemed to me that she meant after I was gone. That's me, the universal charmer. With a certain subject off limits for the nonce, Irene told Daisy about the day we'd had, and the older woman clapped her hands together in glee when she heard about Jared's comeuppance. Obviously, Irene had been keeping her apprised of our plans. She was very interested in how we planned to market our pod document support service. So was I, because outside of a few faint notions, I didn't have a detailed plan. All my efforts had been concentrated on developing the plan and the proposal for the plan for Uni-G. Well, I was outnumbered by two smart women, who insisted that I pull my after Uni-G marketing plan out of wherever I was hiding it and let them critique it. So, while Irene served out late lunch for herself and me, I brainstormed a marketing plan onto a notepad. There was a lot of research to be done on potential client firms. I didn't want them to be competitors of Uni-G. In fact, I didn't want them to be competitors of each other, either. They would have to be in different, non-competing industries. We had to make them secure and certain that we had no likelihood of spilling proprietary information from one client to another. They had to be certain of our discretion. Then it seemed my stomach was getting queasy fairly often. I did an early pregnancy test and realized that I was carrying that sweet little child you met today. I could never ever consider an abortion. No matter how it was conceived, the result was an innocent child. I transferred my credits to a local college and went part-time at night while I worked temp jobs to help pay our bills. By that time, it had become increasingly difficult for Daisy to work only occasionally as a consultant. I was at 7 months when I graduated. I didn't bother to go to the ceremony. I was able to work 1 more month, and then I had to quit to prepare for my baby. Daisy could work very little by then, and we lived by taking money out of her pension funds until I could get back to work. We paid a few bucks to neighbors to come over and do what was needed to physically care for little Liz and the big things like baths. Daisy could change her and feed and burp her while using her walker. Anything she couldn't handle, she would call Marge next door or DD from across the street. Once I had my degree, I worked a couple more months as a temp. One job was at UniG and heard about Kimberly leaving. Well, I applied and met you at the interview, and you know the rest. I couldn't resist. I put my arms around her and held her to show her what I thought of her courage, and maybe to show some other things that I thought of her. Daisy wheeled herself over, and we had a group hug. We heard Liz coming back in from the yard, and so we went to our respective corners, so to speak. But before I left that evening, Irene and I had time for a few private words. Even though Kimberly and her a-hole lover were the ones committing adultery, it was possible that they were trying to catch us. No real legal reason, just trying to make certain I was being appropriately miserable and maybe to get something on us to make their adultery look less bad. We would have to be discreet. It was possible that we were being watched. And we did spend a lot of time together, during working hours and after. We were now obviously business partners, so we would have to be careful. Paranoid? Maybe, but there was no point in taking any chances. We went back to work as UniG short-timers and after-hours L&M vendors. In the meantime, Daisy backed us up on the computer as a full participant. We worked our 2 final weeks and collected our final paychecks, but we would not start billing as L&M until we were completely terminated. It was an interesting experience as our friends at UniG watched us work out our string, and yet knew we were not leaving. There was talk of a farewell luncheon, but I firmly nixed that idea. Harlan Baldridge came down on our final day as UniG employees and took us to lunch. Among other things, I think he wanted to emphasize to the UniG folks that we had his okay. At the restaurant, our nominal supervisor, he ran us through our termination checklists. What a difference from the last time. We kept our keys, but accepted orange unescorted vendor ID badges in lieu of the green UniG ones. We handed over our corporate Amex cards. We each had an equivalent Amex card issued under the L&M name. We had to give up the UniG laptops, but had already copied over the relevant EPUB files from the hard drives to our own new laptops. Harlan waved the termination blurb sheet at us, and we all laughed. Nothing was said about EAs, and we both signed the meaningless document. The last things on his checkout list were our termination checks and the HR paperwork. We signed up for the COBRA extension of our health and dental care. Then it was done, and we all had sinful desserts and a brandy to toast the end of our run at UniG and our new partnership with UniG as support vendors. We played hooky that afternoon and went to Harlan's country club to drive some golf balls and otherwise celebrate our new status. Harlan's wife Priscilla joined us for dinner, and she spent a lot of time talking to Irene. I looked at Harlan, but he shrugged his shoulders to show he was a clueless male just like me. Priscilla was very gracious and friendly to me for the rest of the evening. The next day, we hit the ground running as vendors. We had a lot of work to do, what with fulfilling our UniG commitments while making the changeover to Online Pod. It took us 2 days to get the website links up and running. We had a stack of checklists, and Irene started disposing of some of the inventory of hard copy EPUB from our 2 storerooms. The company had a recycling service to deal with our large volume of waste paper. We had them come in, take the designated manuals and such off the shelves and bundle them off. After they stripped one storeroom, UniG Housekeeping Services took apart the shelving and put it in storage for future use. We cleared out the other storeroom, and the Housekeeping Services people knocked down the partitions and opened the space up to the rest of the production floor. We stored the remaining hard copy stocks in what had been the office space that Irene and I had used, while we moved ourselves up to the vendor temporary office spaces. Once in the vendor spaces, we moved the hard copy remaining stock up to grace our temp offices and gave up the remaining office space down on the production floor. Production would start readying the space within a few months, as work could be done only when the fabrication lines were down for maintenance. Meanwhile, I went on a marathon road trip to UniG's clients and sales outlets to demonstrate how to order EPUB via the UniG webpage. Before I left them, I made certain they had someone trained and reassured in clutching the how-to video. I was doing this for the local area, because that's where most of our traditional clients were. We mailed out the video to the more dispersed offices and told them to call if they thought they needed a visit. I was quietly praying that they would take it as a point of pride to do it without help. As it was, a quick call to Irene usually got them over any hurdles and successfully using the ordering system. I couldn't start making our marketing pitch to the first of the possibles on the L&M potential client lists until my travels for UniG were over. We were trying to be as scrupulous as possible in keeping our UniG responsibilities separate from L&M work. In the interim, Daisy, who had no UniG responsibilities, did a good deal of telephone and online work, getting prices for binders and paper and printing format requirements. And that opened up a can of worms. Once she got into the nitty-gritty details of how it worked, we discovered what the pod printing houses actually needed to be able to print with. I had royally screwed up by making one too many assumptions. I had assumed that as long as we had files in the Microsoft family, such as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and so forth, the pod printing services could use them with no problem. After all, that was how the traditional sheet-fed flatbed press printers worked. Big mistake. Wrong assumption, and it was mine and mine alone. There were two commercial software applications that were designed specifically for publication, Gutenberg and Caxton. The publishing firms that we were counting on needed the files to be in one of those two applications. There were literally thousands of conventional Microsoft files that had to be converted into one of those publication-ready application formats. The applications were different from those that were compatible with Microsoft and had dozens of quirks that had to be learned and mastered. L&M, that is, Daisy, Irene, and I, would have to master them and make those conversions, which were basically labor-intensive copy and paste operations, for thousands of files. And I had not known that and had not factored those labor costs into our budget or into our timeline. We were screwed, and again, it was all my fault. I had been so smugly certain that my plan was airtight. I felt that I had let the women down badly. I told them so, as bluntly as I could. We had a narrow time frame to get the file conversion done. I would be spending hours each evening converting the UniG electronic files that we had into the optimal kind of formats that they needed. We bought 2 more laptops and 3 copies of the Gutenberg application, and Daisy and Irene worked with me. After a full evening, it was apparent that even 3 strong, we needed help. I asked to see Harlan Baldridge and told him the problem. I told him that I would have to hire temporary people to make the deadlines. I explained that it would not cost him anything. I would have to eat the costs. My concern was bringing people in who would have access to UniG proprietary information. Within an hour, Olivia had sent in UniG-wide all-hands solicitation for people with experience with the Gutenberg application. Olivia got 16 responses from UniG facilities in the region, most of whom were apparently moonlighting for extra income. Harlan gave them dispensation from EA restrictions on working outside the company, and we gave them access to the files within the UniG firewall. They were to submit their invoices directly to L&M, which would make the appropriate deductions and cut them their checks for the outside work. I berated myself for my cocky attitude that had put us so deep in the hole, but neither of the Ellison women would let me beat myself up. I started to repeat my verbal self-accusations and apologies one evening. I was startled when sweet, gentle Daisy reached over and slapped my face. "Stop it, Ross. Just stop it right now," she said. "Okay, you made a mistake, and we're all working to recover from it." "So what?" "Ross, you took me into your confidence and gave me back a sense that I was good for something besides babysitting and dishwashing. You have been the first man who Irene knows that she can trust." "No, don't interrupt. I know all about that one night. You needed comfort and support and affection at a low point in your life. You have no idea how much Irene got from being able to supply that for you." "Mother," Irene said. "Now I'm telling tales that I shouldn't, but you have to know that Irene feels a lot more for you than just friendship." "Mother." I looked at Irene, and then a smiling Daisy, and then back to a suddenly blushing Irene. Nothing more needed to be said. We worked together as before, except for the huge addition of Daisy. We took our lunches together and of course our dinners, at either my house or Irene's. I had plenty of room for Daisy and Liz, and we put in some ramps for Daisy's wheelchair. If anyone was watching for signs of impropriety between the two principals, there was the constant presence of Irene's mother and daughter around the clock. And it was fitting that two entrepreneurs spend time together. And much of our together time was spent working. And there were no repeats of that one evening. We scattered a few emotional words and hugs here and there, then there and here. But we would be patient. After the lottery ticket would be claimed. After the divorce became final. Irene spent more time doing the nuts and bolts work at UniG than I did, and she now had total responsibility for the changeover to the pod model. She had painfully taught herself HTML and some other website craft to that end, but she enlisted the moonlighting talents of some UniG heavyweights so as to ensure that the ordering would be completely secure. This was proprietary data. After all, I was on the road or frantically overseeing the file conversion process. I'd bring the converted files in to load them in the server that would service the ordering process. When I was at Uni, I realized that Irene's legion of girlfriends treated me warmly. They showed in many ways that they accepted me as one of the truly good guys. I knew that she would never have told them about anything specific between us, but I decided that they had tuned into her happiness, and I suppose, for mine, too. You'd have had to be blind not to see how happy we were when we were together. In a friendly warning, one of the girls told me that there were some people who were taking an interest in me and Irene, and these were not people anyone thought of as being all that friendly. I had always assumed that Kimberly might be suspicious, but if she was setting spies on me, I couldn't think of a really good reason why. When my women and I talked about this, I argued that there was no reason for Kimberly to be jealous or concerned about me getting on. She was getting what she wanted, wasn't she? But Daisy said that it wasn't enough for Kimberly to have her heart's desire. Part of her happy ending had to be heightened by me being miserable. There had to be no happy endings for me. Reluctantly, I was forced to buy into Daisy's explanation. For several weeks, we hardly saw each other during the day. When she could work out the scheduling, Daisy would bring Liz to our work site so we could have lunch together. There was a handicapped van service that acted like a taxi service for wheelchair-equipped people. It had a power lift to raise the wheelchair up to the inside deck level, so it could be rolled in and out. I made a mental note to see about getting a similarly equipped van or SUV, so that we could all go out on weekend jaunts sometime down the road. I felt that we were working up to being something resembling a family. Right now, we were a family with huge money problems. As we struggled to get out from under my budget miscalculations, our expenditures were way ahead of our periodic fees from Uni. I had to go get an unsecured loan from my bank so that we could make our mortgage payments and keep up with the other bills of 2 households. When we went through that, I started withdrawing money from my 401k. I took a big penalty and interest hit on each withdrawal, but we needed the cash to pay the bills. Irene did the same, pointing out that we were all in the same boat. You might be wondering why it was such a big deal. We had that big lottery payoff due within a few more months, didn't we? Sure, but it was the same as a million years away. We couldn't borrow against it. There were some lending services that claimed they would lend money against sure future payments, but we still had that gap between my divorce and the final payoff date for the lottery. If we borrowed against the future lottery winnings, we thought the watchers would pick up on it as surely as if we just had Irene claim the prize early. Then they'd ask why Irene simply didn't claim the prize. What was she waiting for? We felt that if Irene claimed the prize with over 4 months to go before my divorce, that would give Kimberly and Randy that much time to dig. They could set private investigators on us. It was possible that they might come up with something. We thought we could not take that risk. When we reached the limit on 401k withdrawals and L&M was still in the red, Daisy asked me to drive her down to her bank. She had a small portfolio of bonds and told the account rep to cash them in. I started to argue with her, but she nailed me with the financial facts of life. Ross, I'm in this enterprise, just like you and Irene, she said. I work for it, and I have my future tied up in it as much as you guys. If it makes you feel better, give me a few shares of stock and call this an investment. But I am not going to let it fail for lack of what little I have. She got a cashier's check for $4,378.44 and signed it over to me to deposit in the L&M business account. Damn, I was hooked up with some wonderful women. It made the difference. 5 days later, I deposited a payment just as the L&M account balance got down to $56.68. It was the magic moment when the fee payment curve crept up to kiss and then passed through the expenditures curve, and we were doing better than breaking even. From then on, we moved solidly into the black. Some of the expenditures were first-time and startup charges, and once they were paid, the subsequent charges were more moderate. Stabilized, we were a little ahead of where we had been as wage slaves, but having to pay for our health insurance under Cobra and for our own life insurance and other benefits we'd given up ensured that we were both on tight budgets. Irene's Cobra covered Liz and Daisy, but we were in the black, and the business balance crept up. Or would have if I had not kept investing it in equipment and office space we would need to expand. Our income went up by about 20%, but our net asset value remained negative. I had a reason for that had nothing to do with our business model. In the 3rd month, we won another contract and brought on board our second client, Caldwell Training Systems. My budget figures for that contract were solid, and now that we had the model of how we had worked up Uni, everything went faster and we had fewer problems. We were still putting money back into our enterprise for marketing planning for our next target companies. We also brought in more equipment and paid for temps to do the file conversions. We put them in the new office spaces we were renting. We were grateful to the Uni moonlighters, but could not use them for Caldwell out of consideration for conflict of interest and protection of Caldwell's proprietary information. We were drawing modest salaries, and our home and personal budgets loosened up. We paid Daisy on a per-hour basis. Of course, we didn't go out and spend money on entertainment either. When the lottery drop dead date neared, my paranoia reared and went permanently rampant. There was an irrational fear that there might be someone lurking around the lottery office to rob us of the ticket. I had an old World War II British Webley revolver that my grandfather had picked up after the war. That same strip mall that had the 7-Eleven and the Papa John's had a weapons shop whose owner was a gunsmith. I went in and showed it to him and asked if it could be made operational. He laughed and said he would have to replace damned near everything except the trigger. He said it would be cheaper to just trade it in on a modern weapon. I noted that he couldn't quite hide his interest in getting his hands on the Webley. But when I found that there was a mandatory 10-day waiting period, I said that I needed protection in 2 days. The upshot was that in exchange for the Webley, the gun store owner came along with Irene and me as a bodyguard. He was armed with something that looked like it was from the movie Men in Black and wore an impressive-looking security guard uniform. It was probably unnecessary, but the fact was that Irene and I walked into the lottery office with no trouble. We were forearmed with advice from Lawyer Aldrich and his all-star advisors. Irene had opened up accounts in 2 very stable money market mutual funds, which were part of 2 highly rated fund families that we would use to diversify after we got over the startup hurdles. She also had savings and checking accounts in 3 banks. I sat in the waiting area with Uber security guardmen, trying to look inconspicuous while Irene got her ticket validated and gave the lottery people her routing numbers and account numbers. Our lawyer and his financial advisor team cohorts had advised us to spread the money out, so that all of the money that we needed to keep liquid was in bank accounts that would all be covered under the FDIC limits. Irene instantly became a moderately rich young woman. A couple of days later, I filed a statement of my net worth with the court for the final allocation of community property. Well, it was literally true if you looked into my piddling bank accounts. I did include my interest in L&M Solutions, but had a preliminary valuation from my accountant that the corporation had only moderate net asset value. I was the owner of half of that, whatever that amount was. I had my accountant, who happened to be moonlighting from being nouveau rich Irene's accountant, working on coming up with the final figure. He said he'd have it ready by the time we sat down with the judge. Irene didn't go to the penultimate hearing where the money would be thrashed out. There wasn't any reason for her to be there, and so she worked at UniG that day. Ironically, it turned out that Kimberly had a greater net worth value than me. It seemed that the highly compensated Randy Carson was paying all the bills at their little love nest, and she was socking her pay away. Not real smart of her. Her accounts were part of community property, just as were mine. I really had no interest in any of her assets. All I wanted from her was distance and freedom. Freedom. I had a wild notion to shout it out like Mel Gibson, but I had an equally sudden fear that she and Randy might have come equipped with the tools for drawing and quartering me. But Lawyer Aldrich said that the community property laws had to be followed and all the assets had to be included. Hers, ours, and mine. Our biggest shared asset was the house, or rather, the equity in it. With the softening of the housing market, that equity had been shrinking anyway. We'd had the house appraised and I was willing to take out a second trust loan to pay Kimberly her half of the equity, which as I said wasn't as much as she would have hoped. She bitched and moaned, but the court told her the value figure was proper. I wanted the house and she didn't, so we agreed to take the house out of the equation by means of the second trust and the payment I made to her from it. I could not have used second trust money for the business because Kimberly had to agree to the loan. She would only do that if it was in her interest. That unsecured loan I'd previously taken out to pay the business bills was for L&M Solutions, but it counted as a personal indebtedness against me and reduced my contribution to our community property. Fancy that. When Kimberly and her land shark lawyer learned that I had half ownership of a business, they had envisioned sucking me dry of half of its value. Well, you know how you calculate the value of a business? You take the assets, subtract the liabilities, and what's left is the net value. I owned half of that. The assets consisted of about $2,000 in the corporate account and an accounts receivable invoice to UniG for another $5,000. There was the remaining value of L&M's 2 contracts, but that didn't count until each invoice was paid. Offsetting that were the payments we made for our L&M Solutions spaces, hardware, software, and support services. We leased laptops, Blackberries, cell phones, a server system, a couple of docking stations, a rented SUV exclusively for L&M use, sophisticated software applications, such as the biggest, baddest commercial antivirus adware spyware package in captivity, high-speed business internet services, and the like. They were all obtained under contract, and the costs of those contracts over their life were technically liabilities of L&M Solutions. Technically, we wound up with a negative net asset value. It was priced at $1 for community property purposes. In the most generous valuation possible, leaving aside the equity in the house, which we had already settled, our community property amounted to about $28,000, $14,000 apiece, all of which was from Kimberly's money. Kimberly made some noise about wanting in on the company itself as half owner of my half. I told her lawyer that we would default on our contracts and go bankrupt first, in which case her half of my half would be worth nothing. We offered $7,000 on top of her $14,000 for a quitclaim against L&M's future earnings. Since we were apparently deep in the red at that point, her lawyer advised Kimberly to accept. She did. We asked for 4 months after the date of dissolution to be able to pay the quitclaim, and the hearing judge ruled that was reasonable. When it was all over, I shook the hand of Henry Aldrich. The final meeting for the dissolution was now on the calendar a few days hence. I sat and watched Kimberly and her lawyer talking quietly as they got ready to leave. It was all over now, except for the last formality. What was I thinking of? Not much. What was I feeling? About the same. I went home, to my quiet empty house. To be certain that nothing untoward could derail the divorce, we had tacitly agreed to stay apart until it would be all over. I again pondered the riddle of Kimberly, but gave it up as unknowable. What I did not feel was any sense of loss. The flywheel had at last wobbled to a halt. I regretted the waste of both our lives after such a promising start. On the 27th of February, the court granted the dissolution, the papers were signed, and I went home. To my now quite full, love, and caring-filled home, where Irene and Daisy and Liz were now waiting anxiously for my return and my news. I came in and wordlessly went to Irene and got down on both knees and asked her to marry me. Even though we had never been together sexually after that one never-mentioned night, I was certain of my feelings. Apparently so was she. She let out a strange, strangled scream and enveloped my head in her arms. I was dimly aware of Liz's small arms wrapping around us, and a few seconds later felt Daisy's small, trembling hand on my head. When we untangled, I said I would take that as a yes. We set a date for a small wedding as soon as it could be managed. The rumor mill at UniG made a point of informing Kimberly of the impending marriage. That it was to Irene, who was known to have just turned in a winning lottery ticket, sent my newly ex-ed wife, running to her lawyer screaming. Kimberly was right. It was collusion. It was a blatant conspiracy. She knew that I bought lottery tickets fairly regularly, and she guessed exactly what happened. I had bought a winning ticket and we had conspired to deny her fair share. The judge who had presided over the divorce summoned us into a hearing and questioned us. Well, mainly, he questioned me. We lied. Repeatedly. Like wet rugs. Neither of us was troubled by the ethics or morality of it. Who had been the cheat in my marriage? Who had cheated around with a better earning man, dumping me like trash? Was she to prosper from it? The judge said he had his suspicions. In her presence, he asked me point blank why I had married Irene. I didn't blink an eye. I said I'd married her for her money. He asked Irene how she felt about that, and she said she didn't care why I'd married her. She was just ecstatic that I had. That she had lusted after me for 6 years, and any way that got me into her bed and her family's life was fine with her. The judge shook his head. There were some attempts with private investigators at discovery of some illegal agreement, but they all faltered. There was an illegal agreement, but only in an unwritten understanding between us. You know, the kind that weren't worth the paper they were written on? Well, this one was, because the two understandees loved each other. All the sleuthing around turned up nothing useful. Irene and I had every reason to be together a lot. We were in business together. Ultimately, the judge found there was no credible evidence of collusion and ruled against Kimberly's petition. As our fortunes in business and relationships went north, poor Kimberly's went south. Kimberly was not popular at UniG. Since so many UniG people liked Irene, and since Irene loved me, they liked me too. And since Kimberly and Randy's adulterous relationship had been blatantly flaunted about to embarrass and cuck me, they mostly took our side. As I have said, Irene and I had lied to the courts and broken a number of laws with a clear conscience. It must have been contagious. The people in HR and accounting are bound to keep secret all personal and financial data in UniG employees' folders. So it was a great breach of confidentiality when it was somehow leaked that good time Randy Carson had a wife and 2 children stashed away down in Charleston, South Carolina. They were his dependents for tax purposes and primary and secondary beneficiaries for his insurance. That was in protected HR files. Apparently Randy had never gotten around to sharing that factoid with Kimberly. Did I ever mention that Ollie's wife, Sophie, worked in HR and had access to the personnel files? And that I had helped both her and Ollie get their jobs? Did you ever hear of casting bread upon the waters? And because Kimberly and Randy had flaunted their relationship to me and many others, their adulterous affair seemed to have been pointedly brought to the attention of the director of HR, who soon learned that one Harlan Baldridge, the VP for Corporate Support Services, was taking an interest. There were morals clauses buried in that boilerplate gobbledygook that every employee had to sign when hired. The policies and procedures were plain on the subject. Openly adulterous relationships and the destruction of a marriage fell on the wrong side of those clauses. They were rarely invoked, but a certain level of management decided to make this one of those cases. Both Kimberly and Randy Carson were called in to account for themselves, after which they were both terminated with prejudice. Somehow an account of the substance of that session got mailed to Mrs. Serena Carson of Charleston, who did not take it very well. A private investigator came up and took statements from a number of UniG employees who were very cooperative. She divorced Randy on grounds of adultery and got alimony and child support. Randy was a very good salesman and had no problem finding another sales position, but at a significantly reduced income from his UniG glory days. His lifestyle took a further hit from the alimony and child support payments, which were deducted from his pay. Kimberly was long gone from his bed and life by then. They had a very public, very loud dissolution of their own in a restaurant one evening. Apparently, she had counted on them getting married, and the revelation of his existing family didn't go over well with her. Revenge is supposed to be sweet. I found it to be overrated. Kimberly called me. She asked me if I would be willing to meet her someplace to talk. She said that she had some things that she wanted to tell me and wanted to answer any questions that I might have for her. I suggested a popular restaurant, and she said that would be okay. I got there 10 minutes early, but she was waiting for me. I wanted a lot of people around to avoid any suggestion that it was a rendezvous. She looked very hot and sexy. I could see she had gone to special effort to be at her best. After we ordered, I asked her what we were meeting for. Ross, the first thing I want to do is apologize for all of the terrible things I did to you and our marriage. I'm alone now, as you obviously know, and I've had time to think about what I did. I've been to a counselor, too. She made me realize that there were reasons that I did what I did. I want you to know that I did not set out to cheat on you. When Randy started to come on to me, I held up my hand to stop her. Kimberly, stop. You may have a need to do a big confessional, but I have no need to listen to it. She looked stunned. I thought you would want to know the reasons why I did what I did, she said. I looked at her. Kimberly, I do not. I did while it was going on. Lord knows, there was a long time when I wondered what was happening. I was afraid to confront you and afraid that it was because of some failure in me. I went crazy trying to think of what I could do to get you back to loving me. Now, I don't care. I've talked to other people and thought it through and through. I've satisfied myself that it's your bad. It was all on you. That there was nothing that I did that merited what you did. I wasn't a perfect husband, but I wasn't a bad one, either. Now, if you think that I'm wrong, and that it's somehow my fault and so you and your counselor have put the blame on me, well, I'd like to hear how. Who's the bad guy? Here? You or me? No, Ross, it was me, she said. That's what I wanted to tell you about. Yes, but I have no interest in the why and how. I don't want to know what you were thinking, or not thinking, or what Randy did to seduce you. I don't care. I've closed the book on you and our time together. Tell your friends. Tell the next guy you get serious about. Hell, tell Serena Carson. She might be interested. All I know is that I found someone who loves me for myself. I can trust Irene to be true and faithful. And that's what is the most important to me. Sex is wonderful, but trust is the essential. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Kimberly, but I don't want to hear your confession. The meal came, and we ate in silence. As soon as I was finished, I put some money down on the table and got up to leave. I have to eat and run, Kimberly. I have to go home to the people who love me. I thought I saw her start to tear up. Might have been mistaken. Regardless, I walked out anyway. She no longer deserved my comfort. One night, when we were lying sweaty and happy in our big marital bed, Irene propped her head up on her arm and said she had a question for me. Ross, I've been wondering, did you decide to trust me with the lottery ticket because you had fallen in love with me? I knew for a long time that you felt that way. You were honorable and never said boo, but there's no way you could conceal your feelings. I had been falling for you for a long time, Irene, I said, but I was married and I just suppressed it. Despite being a lying liar about the lottery and the company's assets, I do try to be as honorable as possible in the important things. I had no right to complicate your life by telling you how I felt, and I never could quite read how you felt about me other than as a boss and a friend. So yes, I was in love with you. But being in love had nothing to do with deciding to trust you. Remember that day when Jared told me I was fired? I felt pretty crappy about getting dumped, but I was sure that Kimberly and I could survive. Of course, there was a lot I didn't know about Kimberly then. In my happy ignorance, I figured we could cover our basic expenses with her salary. And I knew I could bring in a decent amount of money going back and doing temp work. But I knew it was much scarier for you. I knew how terrified you were that you'd be fired too. I didn't know about Liz then, but I knew you were supporting your mom. I thought it was one person, but you had two helpless people depending on you. Yet despite that, when Jared offered you my job, the very first thing you did was risk it to bring me back in. You put your own future and your family's future on the line to help me. When I got my head clear of what a shit Kimberly was and thought back to that, I knew you would never let me down. That's why I knew I could trust you with anything. The lottery, anything. And I always will. Remember how I said at the beginning that losing my job was the second luckiest thing that ever happened to me? Winning Irene's love was the first. No question. Getting my own business with Irene and Daisy was the third. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.